He hears the beacon as a hymn of drowned cities, a lattice of noctilith numbers calling him by old names. A rogue magos promises an endless tide of sleep if he crosses and eats only the choir, not the flock. Hunger weighs and remembers, and he chooses to hunt the caller who binds dreams to industry. He turns angles that are not angles until the blackstone spire's geometry flowers. The breach opens like a pupil, and he falls through. Cloud layers rip and boil over Necromunda. Hive Primus rises like a continent of knives, its spires cutting the storm into black ribbons. The sump sea below becomes a bowl struck by a god's knuckle. Tides climb the rusted ribs of ruined manufactoria and spill into sunken tunnels. He arrives not as a silhouette, but as pressure, weight on thought, an abyssal notion wrapped in flesh that isn't flesh. His shape is cathedral tall, plates like wet basalt, eyes lanterns in a drowned trench. When he breathes, the water furrows. Voxnets scream. All precincts report. Lord Marshal Neris Voss of the Enforcers braces at a rain-sheened hololith table. Baton tucked into belt, scar across her lip white with tension. Red glyphs swarm across Sector Primus. Habstacks flood, sump dams crack. Old gang warrens go dark. A boy on a gantry clutches a prayer-stamped lunch tin as wind blows his cap away. Below him, the sump heaves a carcass barge against its moorings. He does not know any god to ask for help. His breath hits his teeth like broken glass. The thing in the storm looks at the boy and the barge and the gantries and the millions under them. It remembers a bargain. It remembers the taste of promises. It lowers one vast limb and stops the surge, pushing water back with a moving wall of idea and meat. Metal screams as cables snap. The barge spins, but not into the pylons. Riveters drop to their knees. Someone shouts that the machine spirit is merciful. Someone else sobs that the darkness has learned their names. He pays for it. Blackstone resonance bites like cold iron in his thoughts. The spire's noctilith crown, miles away, hums at a frequency that saws the edges of his shape. He feels the sisters long before they arrive. Null fields grazing his hide like a frost that kills color. Enforcer helicraft sweep in low. Spotlights rake his flanks, turning rain into knives of light. All units, Voss says, voice flat on the command feed. Lock curfew Alpha across sectors Gamma through Theta. Evacuate some shorelines. Route to high Habs. Keep a corridor open. She looks up through the rain at his eyes and doesn't blink. If you can understand me, move with me, not against my corridors. He understands in the way a trench understands pressure. He adjusts his bulk, leaning to make a windbreak that funnels people toward the lit routes. It is not mercy. It is investment. The choir that called him sings in the mind frequency that mortals exhale while dreaming, and their lungs must keep beating for that music to continue. I died Kinpo. On the cathedral terrace above the sump, incense burns with the sweet smell of promethium and old wood. Inquisitor Severine Holt of the Ordo Malleus watches him through sleet. Her hair is a dark crown, a rosette a shard of night pinned to a breastplate, engraved with the names of worlds. 5 grey knights stand behind her, silver statues holding storm bolters like verdicts. Sign of the archenemy, the sergeant murmurs over a private channel. Not yet, Holt says. Ritual vector points at a Mechanicus corruption node. The beast is the consequence, not the cause. Her gaze flickers toward the distant spire where a crown of blackstone glows like smouldering coal. We cut the route, while the flood holds. In the manufactorum below, a sanctioned psyker keels over with a cry. His medallion clinks on bone-studded floor. He's inside the air. He gasps to a medici. He's heavy in the words. He's counting us without numbers. The beast walks. Each step presses sheet metal shorelines flat and then releases them, a deliberate tide that keeps the water off the evacuation lanes. A gang of Orlok steel riggers run cables from cranes to stabilize listing hab blocks. They lash his armor like a mooring point on a titanic pier. He allows it the way an ocean allows a buoy. He feels the engine of the choir. The rogue Margos nested in the spire's mid-crown. Not a priest of Mars anymore, but something peeled and reassembled. A reef of augmetics with a heart of greed. The man has cut holes in his soul where dreams can be poured. Down in the sump vapors, cult chants surface like bubbles. A dozen voices in 8 broken languages cry to anything that will hear. Something hears. The first demons come as slicks of shadow that move against the wind, then acquire shape, maggot-mouthed, armored with scripture nails, bound to the old contract of the word-bearers. They climb the sides of the barge like tide-born centipedes and reach for the boy on the gantry. The beast is faster. He lifts a limb wider than a street and drives it down between demons and child, sending shockwaves that rattle rivets from plates. He does not crush them with weight. He crushes them with sleep. A pulse moves out from him, a subsonic lullaby that is not soft. The demons stumble and sink, their forms becoming the bad dreams of things that do not sleep. Saints preserve. A dock matron breathes, crossing herself with a grease-black hand. It put them out like candles. He pays for that too. The lullaby costs dream heat, the thin river of psycho breathings and sleeping murmurs drawn through the spire. The sisters hit his flank with a null bubble at the same time, and pain flowers as white frost up his nerves. He does not roar. He retracts an arm and holds still until his thoughts re-knit. Codex note. Noctilith attenuates warp expressions. When lashed to null fields, it scalps intent into inert geometry and charges all costs in the mind. Lord Marshal, I need your force in a pin through Gilder's Gate, Holt says, striding toward the gravlift there. We go up the spire. If we sever the choir, the flood loses conductor. Voss glances at the beast again. And if it decides we're the cattle we smell like? Then we die tired, Holt says. Move. A storm gull slams into the beast's shoulder and slides off into the sump. He watches the tiny life vanish in the scum and has no word for pity. He has only the bargain and the hunger that threads it. A vox choir swells from the spire's mid-levels, a machine-canned drone latticed with human throats. Tied to sleep, it repeats. Tied to sleep. Lights march up the crown of Noctilith like sparks running along a wire. Every sleeper in Hive premise twitches in unison. The beast tastes the twitch as a flavor. Inside the spire, the rogue Margos Selenfesk peels back his hood. His face is a palimpsest of surgeries and chemical burns, features rewritten until they are simply coordinates. Mecha dendrites drip oil on a floor inscribed with 1,000 circles. He watches rain slide down a pane of sanctified glass and sees the beast reflected as a cathedral of appetites. Come, he says to no one and to it. Prove the theorem. The underhive fissions with panic. Esker chemslingers run under tarpaulins with crates to hire habs. Goliath brutes shoulder old women 2 at a time. Our preacher kneels in sewage and sings the litany against the shape that breaches, voice breaking on the against. A child on a stairwell points at the beast and declares he is on their side because the demons sank like dead fish. His mother says, "Don't say that out loud." The grey nights descend like judgment. They trail incense and machine oil, words burning in the air behind them. By the Emperor's light, intones the Justica, let the calculus of faith be balanced. He looks at the beast with a gaze like a blade. The beast feels only a distance, a cool hill far from the sea. Holt presses her palm to a lectern on the gravlift. Gears bite. Keep your hate clean, she says, a whisper without sentiment. This is not the foe we killed today. Voss smokes in the corner, eyes on the city map crawling with evacuation tags. We owe it, she says, surprising herself. We owe the thing a corridor. The lift climbs. Through a seam in the doors, Holt watches the beast move with enormous care, placing limbs between towers, turning a shoulder to take the wind and break it for a swarm of evacuees crossing a girder bridge 2 kilometers long. When one pier fails with a gunshot crack, he pushes it up with a fingertip that would pulp a tank. The bridge trembles like a tightrope over a beast's tongue and then steadies. At the lip of the sump, a small boat with a candle in a jam jar creeps along the edge of the flood, 2 figures rowing. The light vanishes and reappears in the rain like a tiny star lost among larger ones. The beast adjusts his mast to make a lee. He thinks of it as moving a reef. Vox sirens shift pitch. A new sound cuts the storm. Chanting through loud hailers, Vox amplified and layered. 8 notes, each an old word for drowning. The word bearers come. They march up the sun promenade. Red armor slick with rain, helms wrought like speakers that tell lies. Dark Apostle Malachar carries a staff made from a servo spine braided with wet scripture and bound in 8 bands of brass. The demons that sank rise behind him like a stain climbing back through a cloth. Witness, he says, voice spreading like oil. A godling crawls into your cradle. It is not of us. It does not belong to you. It belongs to hunger, which belongs to us. The beast pivots slowly, like a continent turning to face a ship. The word-bearers aim at him as if aiming at a star. Las fire speckles the word-bearers' formation. Diffused by rain, enforcer lines form on rooftops, dark figures behind cover, muzzles like watching eyes. Hold, Voss orders over Vox. Do not trade shots with Astartes. Buy time with obstacles, not blood. The beast strides toward the promenade. He is not fast. He is inevitable. Malachar smiles, or pretends to. It is difficult to read under a helm worked like an altar. Kneel, drowned child, he calls. Let us thread your hunger into the great loom. We will make a story out of you. The beast breathes, and fog roils off the sump like a curtain. He sings a bar of that hard lullaby again, aimed not at the demons, but at the blood in the word-bearers' brains, at their sleep they haven't taken in years. It washes over them like noise. The armor sings back. Runes burn. Prayer beats science again. He pays for the attempt. The spire's crown draws another mouthful from the city's sleepers. Nightmares sharpen like hooks in 1,000 skulls. He feels the sister's field brush his ribs and steady him against the hungers in his own head. The grey knights hit the promenade from above. Silver bodies fall like coins, land in crouches that dent stone. Storm bolters bark, prayer and mass reactive. Blue flares wander in the rain, where force weapons kiss air. Demons burst like rotten fruit. Malachar laughs without humour. Hold them, Holt orders. We cut the choir. She and Voss push through a gate draped with chains. Auspex sweeps whiteout. Null flare pulses ahead. The sisters of silence descend another stair. Shaved heads wet with rain. Eyes like doorways no one returns through. They nod once and fall in. The beast wades into the promenade and stops the word-bearers from sweeping the flank by simply being in their way. Bolter shells hit his plates and detonate in atonal chords. He loses strips of matter that stitch back as kelp knits in tide. He steals the momentum of their charge by grabbing a collapsed crane and dropping it across the avenue like a drawbridge slammed shut. Malachar points the staff. A cone of words hits the beast and tries to pin him to an idea. Servant. The word is a spear. He feels compelled to kneel and recognize a chain that is not his. The null fields skim him a second time, and the false word breaks like glass. He does not kneel. In the spire, Holt's task force climbs past cogitator shrines that spit sparks in the damp air. Red-robed tech priests watch with glassy indifference, some marked with the sigil of Kellenfesk, some blank as new plates. A maintenance servitor turns its head slowly toward Holt, as if remembering a different neck. Selland reconfigured his choir to accept dream tides as current, Holt says. He is pouring the city's sleep through the Noctilith crown. That lattice is a door handle. We need to break fingers before they pull. Voss steps over a balcony slick with rain and blood. So we arrest him and throw him off his own balcony. If he were alone, Holt says. There's a decision nexus upstairs. Spheres of Noctilith. Any one of them could hold the key. The lift doors open into a machine cathedral. Choir thrones ring the shaft, each occupied by a sleeper wired to a crown, each mouth humming the same phrase. Tied to sleep. Their eyelids flutter as if watching a drowning from inside their heads. Kellenfesk stands at the center on a dais of cog teeth. He turns, eyes like polished screws. Inquisitor, he says as if tasting the word. You brought the silence. Good. Music needs rests. End it, Holt says. Turn it off. I can't, he says, and his grin shows brass instead of gums. Not because I am unable, because I am unwilling. You cannot conceive of the economy I have opened. Voss draws her sidearm and points it at his forehead. I can conceive of holes in skulls just fine. Shoot, he says, mouth a lock without a key. Every component is redundant. Only the beast knows which bars are load-bearing, and his curiosity will not allow destruction yet. The beast reaches a hand higher than a hab block and closes 2 fingers around a charging hellbrute like a parent plucking a screaming child out of a fight. It thrashes and vomits fire. He squeezes until the joints crack like knuckles. The word-bearers slam crack grenades into his knuckles and blow pieces away. They regrow as new plates, while old plates sink into him like swallowed armor. A grey knight justica calls a phrase that breaks rain into knives. He tackles a demon engine under the beast's shadow and cuts its throat with a sword of crackling blue. By Titan, he breathes, rain painting tracks down his helm. The lullaby again, very gentle, aimed at the panicking crowd now, at the mothers pulling children under tarps, at men whose nerve is a thread. He threads the thread through a needle and draws it into the cloth of stillness. They stop running. They move with purpose. He feeds on their calm in a fraction that would be cruel if he were smaller. In him, it is simply the math of tides. Nulls to me, Holt says, pointing at 3 black doors set in the dais like dead eyes. We sever the braid. Lord Marshal, you cover and you keep the Mechanicus back from the field switch. Voss steps up and lights another LHO stick with hands that don't shake. On it, the first door opens onto a core of Noctilith spheres, each turning slow, each inscribed with lines that slip when you try to see them. The sister's presence makes the air taste like iron and snow. Holt's auspex spits static and then draws a jagged circle over a sphere at the center. Cut here, she says. Those are expensive, Kellen says, suddenly very human about it. Send me the invoice, Voss says, and she fires a shot that rings like a cathedral bell when the bullet hits the sphere. The sound goes out through the spire and through the beast. It hurts like biting down on a chipped tooth. He stumbles. The lullaby warps. A rush of nightmares goes through the city like a gust of wolves. He takes it back, pulling the wolves out of skulls and eating them as they thrash. He can taste the faces the wolves wore. He will remember them later. Outside, Malakar laughs through the loud hailers. See, you choke on the same throat you mean to spare. There is no mercy that is not a lie. Only appetite wears an honest face. The beast looks at him, and old currents under slow green lightning move in his pupils. He'll answer later. For now he bends, presses his palm to the promenade, and shapes the stone with pressure into a wall that diverts floodwater away from a stairwell where a dozen enforcers are trapped. Their vox clicks with swearing and thanks. We owe it twice, Voss says quietly. Watching on a screen she has not acknowledged exists. Holt's blade, adamant as law, carves lines into the Noctilith sphere where Voss's bullet marked it. The sisters hold a field that is the opposite of a prayer. The grey-robed tech adepts around the room twitch, as if breath is rationed. Selen lifts his staff. Stop, he says, and the word has an extra hinge that swings inside the ear. Don't, Voss says to herself. And she doesn't. She keeps shooting until her pistol clicks dry, magazine empty. She reloads without looking, hands knowing their craft. Your calculus is small, Kellen says to Holt. You are a needle when we need a loom. I am enough, Holt says, and her mouth is a scar. I always have been. She cuts the last line. The sphere stills, the hum drops like a ceiling lowering, and the spire sighs as if relieved. The choir's song wavers. Half the sleepers stop humming. Two shudder and die. The beast feels it like plumbing rerouted. The dream river narrows. Cost rises per mouthful. Hunger steps closer to the levers in his head and sets a hand on them, a hand with his mother's ring. He does not have a mother. He knows that. On the promenade, the word-bearers surge to capitalize. The grey knights push back in a wall of silver. Bolter shells carve trees of dust from the stone and plant them again. The beast picks up an overturned hab carriage, shakes screaming civilians out onto a safer platform, and throws the carriage through a demon engine. The impact sounds like a saint's bell dropped down a mine shaft. Malachar raises both hands. Rain forms a halo around his staff's head. Witness the second wave, he cries, voice amplified by the storm. Smarter, hungrier. We teach it the honesty of the knife. He is not the only teacher. A new sound enters the city, not from the spire, not from the word-bearers, not from the beast. It is a long, low moan from the deep sump pipes, a call from the ancient pumps that once kept the hive from drowning and now dream of drowning it again. Something big moves in the tunnels below the promenade. The boy on the gantry clutches the rail and looks down into the fog, wanting to see the monster he will tell his grandchildren about. He does not know if he is looking for the red giants or the black reef that saved him. Seal Gate 6, Voss orders. Pull back from Promenade East. We'll lose the bridge otherwise. Lose it, Holt says over the same channel, breath steady. We buy the city time. The beast hears that choice and approves without a word. He does not speak their language. He speaks a tides. In the spire's second room, the second door opens. The smell is sweet and rotten. Holt steps through and almost slips on the floor. It is slick with condensation, and under the condensation, with fat. The second choir is not human. It is made of engineered animals, tubed to crowns, their sleep harvested, as if sleep were milk. Voss swallows and looks at the ceiling. Sometimes, Inquisitor, we do not deserve to live. Most days, Holt says, we live anyway. Cut. They cut. Animals die with small sounds. Holt says the Emperor's prayer under her breath because some prayers are for those doing the killing, not those being killed. Outside, the beast feels the river narrow to a trickle. He leans against the spire and reconfigures his hunger into a tuning fork that pings for the last source. He can almost taste the rogue Magos's pride in the metal like salt in a broth. He does not like it. He does not like the way his head turns toward that taste without his consent. Malachar fires a sign at the spire with his staff. It is a glyph that attaches to concepts as if they were stone. It finds door and nails it open. The promenade buckles. A rift opens above the word-bearers, and demons spill like a bucket of fire, ants kicked over God. The beast steps into the falling swarm and bites one with a mouth he did not have a moment ago. It is not a metaphorical bite. It is a wound channel through which concepts drained, and he drinks. The demon tastes like a church collapsing. He swallows the choir difference. He does not smile. He cannot. Behind him, the bridge collapses as ordered. 1,000 tons of steel fall into the sump and send a wave at the promenade that would sweep a fortress away. The beast squats and makes a shoulder of himself, and the wave breaks on him, water climbing his back in towers and sliding down again into the tunnels. He growls, a noise that rearranges rivets. Enforcers crossing complete. Voss reports over Vox, not believing it until she hears her own voice say it. You saved people I told to abandon. Don't make me owe anything a second longer. Holt's team enters the third chamber. The air is very cold. The third choir is empty chairs and one throne at the center, with a crown wired to a brain that does not have a body. It is growing a body from metal below it. Molecules arranging themselves around a desire like frost around a twig. Selen Vesk stands beside it. Fingers on the crown, tenderness in his touch. This one sings more purely, he says. No flesh to muddy the note. I wanted to meet you, Inquisitor. You walk lines like mine. I walk with my eyes open, Holt says. You taped yours closed and called it sight. You cannot cut this one, he says. You can shoot me. You can break the room. The song will keep. It is not sung by throats, but by the difference between throats and the idea of throats. You talk like a monster, Voss says, which is convenient. Holt doesn't argue. She looks at the crown and sees where Tellen's math miscounts. There is a seam where pride is a factor and not a constant. Sisters, she says. They step forward. Silence like a winter spreading. The crown dims as if embarrassed. Frost creeps across the metal like an apology. Selen snarls and lunges. Voss shoots him in the mouth. He falls as if unplugged. Holt sets her blade in the seam and cuts the pride out. The crown stops being a crown. It becomes a ring of cold metal and sits on the floor like something ashamed. The beast feels the river stop and the debt sharpen. He has to pay now instead of drawing advances. He does not like the change in his mouth. He turns his head toward the promenade and sees Malachar lifting his staff to nail a different word to the city. Eat. Don't, Holt says to the room, and to herself and to the beast on a channel she cannot command. She does not know he hears. He does not know she speaks. It changes nothing and everything. He chooses then not to open his mouth further. He closes it, and hunger gnashes his throat from the inside with somebody else's teeth. He goes to his knees by choice, not by word-bearer command. The flood rocks, people stumble. The demon swarm hits him because kneeling makes you smaller. Grey knights break them off like barnacles. The Justicar plants his stormbolter against a demon's tongue and fires until it stops wanting. Stand, beast, he says without malice. Stand if you would not drown us. He stands. His plates run with water and blood. He's very tired, as if he has been holding his breath under a deep wave for a very long time. Malachar lowers his staff. His helm tilts. Now I see your face, he says. You are not ours. We will teach you to be. The pumps in the tunnels groan again. A vast shape moves under the promenade, older than the word-bearers, older than the spire, older than the city. The beast looks down and sees a shadow bigger than him. A skeleton of pipes and tooth wheels and hydraulic tendons. An ancient sump squid, engineered as a maintenance thing before words like sump and maintenance had current meanings, rises within the water and opens a beak. He could kill it. He could eat it. He does neither. He puts one hand on its head and hums into the water. It listens because it remembers a music older than machines. It sinks again, taking with it a floodline that would have written a new map of death. On the spire balcony, Holt watches rain draw black ladders down the beast's shoulders. She will not call it a miracle. She files it under, tool we can use until it breaks in our hands, and she tastes metal. Voss's vox clicks. Promenade partially sealed. Casualties. She stops. No number does this justice. Numbers are what we have, Holt says. Give me the ones we have. 2,000 confirmed dead, Voss says, voice rough. A city owes a thing we don't understand. A city owes itself, Holt says, and it pays by standing. Malachar withdraws into the rain and smoke, dragging wounded demons behind him on hooks of scripture. Next wave, he promises, voice skipping along wet stone. We teach famine to pray. The beast leans on the spire and listens to the city groan. He thinks of the bargain. He thinks of the choir he was promised. He thinks of closing his hand around the spire and cracking it like a salt stick and letting the dream river drown him in sweetness. He thinks of the boy on the gantry and the small boat's jam jar light and the engineer squid's old obedient brain. He does not crack the spire. He is not sure whether that is heroism or simply investment. He only knows the hunger does not end. It begins again inside him like a tide turning. Rain slows, smoke hangs low. Sirens blur into background hum. The city keeps happening. Holt steps to the edge of the balcony with her helm under her arm. Beast, she says, not knowing if it will take offense at small words. Look at me. He does. The world tilts. For a second, they stand in an angled room of wind and stained glass. We make a corridor for you, while you buy us ours, she says. We will not kneel. We will not call you savior. We will call you useful. Walk with us to cut the other roots. He studies the shape of her and the quiet around her that is not null, but control. He recognizes a predator who eats the future and calls it duty. He nods once. The city exhales without knowing why. Voss pops her LHO stick out a third time, fails to light it in the wind, sticks it back behind her ear, and grins without humor. If I live through this, I am going to name a street after that thing, she says, more to the rain than anyone. A very ugly street. On the promenade, a crew of Escher mechanics plant melter charges along a collapsed crane to clear a passage. One of them looks up and squints. You think it's hungry? She asks her sister. It's a city, the sister says, setting the last charge. Of course it is. So are we. From the tunnels comes a smell of old oil and dead fish. From the spire comes the absence of song. From the rain comes nothing, which is sometimes mercy. In the quiet after first thunder, the beast turns his head toward a different thunder. Dropships burning in from high atmosphere, 8 pointed sigils painted in ash on their bellies. The word bearers did not come alone. Their cousins over the void send gifts. Engines scream like boiled bones. He positions himself between the dropship's trajectories and the evacuation corridors, as if simply placing himself there could change their math. It can. He understands angles. He understands being a hill. He makes himself a hill taller than hills and forces the dropships to seek other ground. One, damaged by Enforcer quad guns, miscalculates and plows into the water at a wrong angle. It cartwheels, breaks apart, throws marines like sparks. Grey Knights drop to receive them with swords more idea than metal. Prayers splice with chain blade noise in a braid that cuts night. Holt's voice rides the Vox like a thrown knife. We have ours, we use them. Brace for the larger escalation. Plan for a fight at the crown. The beast peers up through rain to the Noctilith halo. It thrums, empty of song, waiting for a new one. He feels the cost he will pay there like teeth on a future throat. He is not afraid. He does not have a word for fear. He has tides, and tides have schedules. Somewhere 4 levels down, a man who has not slept in 2 days looks at his child and says, "Tomorrow." It is a lie formed from hope and stubbornness. The city stands on a pyramid of those. The beast moves. His steps set metronomes in 1,000 chests. He leaves behind prints full of clean water. Voss turns from the balcony and claps a sergeant on the shoulder. We hold. It is not a plan. It is a tense. Holt sheathes her blade, and the light that had gathered along its edge goes home to wherever it lives. Up, she says to the sisters. Always up. We peel the crown. Behind her, Selenfesk bleeds onto the floor and twitches back toward life. His mecha dendrites twitch like startled snakes. He pulls his ruined jaw back together with tools meant for machines and smiles, with an effort that is all arithmetic and no joy. We built a tide, he whispers. Tides do not care who drowns. He is wrong about some things. He is right about that. The storm turns. The city takes a breath and holds it. The beast angles his body to take the next gust, calculating evacuation paths the way currents calculate beaches. Hunger watches him like a patient creditor. He will pay. He will keep paying. He will go up. The hours are thin and loud. Dropships burn, sirens braid with prayers, and the city moves like a wounded animal that refuses to lie down. Holt climbs, Voss holds. The grey nights cut a path through rain and scripture and metal. The beast leans into the wind and makes it go elsewhere. They reach the crown level by level. Teeth of the hive bitten off by melter charges and careful cutting. Holt refuses the shortest route when it crosses a refuge hab marked for Medicae triage. Around, she says, and the detour costs 20 minutes and saves 40 lives. Voss counts them without speaking. The word-bearers press again with engines shaped like blasphemies that forgot their original shapes. The Justicar plants a ward at a junction, and the demon shadow refuses to step past it. Hold this line, he says to enforcers who have never stood beside a Knight of Titan before. They nod and plant their boots as if hearing a drill instructor's voice from a better life. The beast flattens 2 hapstacks that have already been evacuated and toppling, laying them like fallen bones to make a causeway over the sump for a tide of evacuees. He sets his mass so the beam stops singing and the causeway stops vibrating. Children cross without crying. Mothers cry without sound. On the crown's lower parapet, Escher chemslingers in flak capes unroll spools of line dipped in something that turns rain into slime. They throw it across a spar and yank. A demon engine stumbles, legs gummed with the city's own industrial excretions. Use your dirt, their leader shouts. It owes you. Holt reaches a gantry beneath the Noctilith halo. The spheres above look like a map of dead stars. The sisters sweep ahead, silence compressing breath and thought into clean, hard lines. A Mechanicus loyalist, Margos Lum Tertius, meets them with cogitator keys clutched in Steeler's fingers. His eyes are cold rock under glass. Your heretic fled toward the apex, he says. His choir is cut. He's trying to turn the crown into a lens. For what? Voss asks, breath fogging her visor. To focus the city's fear, Loom says. It is the last abundant resource. Not while I work, Holt says. And she moves. The first victory is taken with screws and oaths. Holt and the sisters lay null anchors in a triangle around the primary mount. The Grey Knights chant a binding overlay that sinks into Noctilith like chalk into rough slate. Loom Tertius hisses prayers to open a maintenance spine no one has accessed since Hive Primus had fewer deaths to remember. He climbs inside the crown like a man crawling into a dead cathedral's organ. When I say, he says, voice tinny in the Vox. You will feel the hum drop. Press then. Voss steps onto the parapet with a satchel of charges. You're a little small for this job. An Orlog rigger shouts over wind. I was born small, Voss says, and she smiles without showing teeth. She sets charges where the crown meets a servo knuckle, 3 triangles and a reserve. She marks each with a strip of yellow blessed tape peeled from her baton. The beast braces against the spire and listens to the hum as if it were a tide table. When Loom says, now, he presses with his thoughts, the way a deep wave presses a reef. The hum goes low enough to taste. Holt slams the final anchor home. Voss clicks the trigger, and the charges cut blackstone like bone worked by an old butcher. The crown lurches and settles without shearing. Controlled collateral rolls out like a breath. The spire doesn't fall. The city shakes and stays. Malachar sees the crown steady and knows something irreversible just happened. He whirls his staff and calls to the demons to flood the crown before the geometry sets in its new shape. They jump like sparks blown back toward the source. The sisters widen their field until their knuckles bleed. Demons arrive as smeared outlines, and the outlines are cut by air. The Justicar lifts his sword and speaks a bind that only someone who has seen Saturn from the wrong side can pronounce. The blade is blue, and then white, and then colourless. And when it meets the first demon on the parapet, the daemon is a sentence with the predicate removed. It falls without drama and becomes rain. Holt does not look at the falling. She tracks Selenfesk through the maintenance galleries, following a smear of machine oil and hubris. He wants the apex, she says. He wants to name the lens and make the city say it back. Names are doors, Voss replies. We've had enough doors today. They corner him in the crown's highest chamber, a place shaped like a mouth that never learned what eating is for. He stands before a panel of black stone with his hands inside its idea. He looks at Holt with eyes that are a fraction less human than they were an hour ago. You cannot hold this, he says, not angry, just certain. You will run out of sisters before you run out of storm. Holt's silence is not a null. It is a held blade. You ran out of brakes 3 years ago, she says. This is just your first crash. He opens the panel with a word he learned when he was 12 and should not have. The crown hums a single note that almost degloves thought. Holt takes a step forward and sets her palm on the panel, and the sisters step in and smother the note with their presence, as if turning light into shadow with will. The beast feels the note as a hook tugging the hunger's leash. He tightens his grip on the spire and refuses to be led. The city should not see him dragged. Voss shoots Selland in the shoulder because she has no patience for men who talk about economies when blood is the currency. He goes down with a scream that isn't formed for human throats anymore. Holt steps in and disconnects his fingers from the blackstone, one by one, like a parent taking a dangerous toy away from a child. End of lens, she says. Loom Tertius pulls himself out of the organ core, filthy, elated, eyes like new coins. I have turned the teeth, he says. The crown will resist forming a focus for any song but a narrow one. Define narrow, Voss says. Human prayers and disciplined hate, he replies. Nothing wide, nothing that eats by breathing. The hum lifts to a higher pitch and stays there, locked. Holt nods. We hold this until we hand it up the chain, she says, and she means the golden chain that ends where light is not allowed to move. Below, the word bearers feel the refusal of their geometry and pull back the way dogs pull back when the house they meant to burn does not take flame. Malachar slams his staff into the stone and breaks 3 runes to spite the floor. First lesson, he says. Vox thrown to every ear with a sin's amplifier. You bought yourselves minutes. We sell hours for flesh. The first victory tastes like metal. It costs more than it pays. It buys time. They fall back to a command nave that used to be a noble's winter garden. Vines grip beams like tired hands. A shrine squats where a fountain once stood. The hololith table shows the hive as a cracked egg with fires for yolk. Voss reports numbers. Holt reports severed options. The Justicar reports what his blades know. The sisters stand in the corners like the absence of ornament. Loom Tertius stands with a cloth wrapped around his hands because he cannot stop shaking. Praise where it is due, the Justicar says, voice carrying like a bell in a stone nave. Without the leviathan's shelter, the promenade would be a morgue. Voss looks at Holt, waiting for the doctrinal cut. Holt lets it be said without editing. Useful, she says, and dangerous at a scale that resists standard verbs. Your standards do not fit this hive, Voss says, softer than she intended. They do not fit this day. Holt's gaze meets hers without heat. Then we make new ones. But listen to the old ones when they save you from loving a tool more than a task. They open the floor for arguments because good commands must bleed to stay clean. An enforcer captain with rubble in his hair says, we hold the causeways only because the thing is willing to be a wall. You can call it a wall while you need it. A shrine keeper who bandaged 20 heads says, we cannot invite what we cannot bless. Loom Tertius says, I've run the numbers through engines older than my oath. If the beast wanted a city meal, it had hours to begin. Instead, it took smaller bites from demons and nightmares and the flood itself. Small to you, Holt says, not to someone's mind. The Justicar turns his helm slightly toward her, voice measured. We have stood beside God engines and seen them place their feet where people are. We do not call them wicked for having feet. We tell them where to step, and when they refuse, we cut their tendon. Voss snorts, then remembers to bow a fraction. With respect, knight, we do not have a tendon big enough for that cut. You have a null and a will, he says. Sometimes they are sufficient. The value debate sharpens because it must. Holt asks the room to speak mercy as a weapon and doctrine as a shield, not as theatre. If mercy means the hive breathes tomorrow, Voss says, then we buy it with names and streets and ugly gratitude. If doctrine means we burn half the hive to keep a ledger clean, we have mistaken the book for the people it was written for. Holt answers herself because she is fairer to her opponents than they are. If mercy names a hunger and nurses it, we have raised a predator in our nursery. If doctrine says no to an ally today, it may say yes to children alive next year because we did not teach the wrong lesson to the warp. The shrine keeper lifts a rosarius with hands that have washed blood. The emperor did not build the Imperium to be safe, she says. He built it to be worth the danger. We stand on that knife, Holt says. We will decide which way to lean again soon. For now, the lens is denied and the promenade holds. We praise and we prepare for what looks at praise and brings a knife. Voss's Vox squeals with new traffic. A signal cuts through all others with priority that cannot be denied. The seal is the sigil of the Officio Assassinorum. Holt feels the room gather itself into silence. The Justicar tilts his head, as if hearing the chime of a far bell. Which temple? He asks. Holt's rosette spits a code that makes the hololith table flinch. Calexus, she says. The Sisters of Silence shift without moving, the air thickening in their corners like frost growing in shade. They sent a blank to a city holding on by prayer, Voss says, mouth dry. To kill it. To kill us too, if we stand in the field too long, Holt says. But yes, to kill it, or to chain it with pain until its choices are our choices. The alarm is not sirens. It is the sensation of something leaving the world as it approaches. The beast feels it before any Vox says its name. A debt collector walks into a room he hasn't entered yet, and the furniture rearranges to face the door. The skin on the city rises in a rash. The gun cutter comes in dark with no lights and no engine note anyone can admit hearing. It cuts a seam in the rain and slides through, as if rain were a curtain hung for it alone. It lands without sound on the crown's east platform. The hatch opens and stays open, a black rectangle that does not reflect light, because light will not be seen near it. The Colexus, assassin, steps out. It is not tall. It is nettle and winter, and an ache behind the eyes that begins before you see the silhouette. Its mask is a skull designed by someone who wanted to frighten machines. The animus speculum sits where eyes might be, if eyes were weapons. People nearby make small animal sounds and forget what they were about to say. One enforcer turns his head, and his rosary slides from his hand to the floor, and he watches it go without belief that it fell. A grey knight takes one involuntary step back, and then arrests himself with will like cold steel. The beast curls around the spire and feels himself go thin. Pieces of his thought that felt like plates behave like cloth. He cannot find the edges of his hunger for one breath, then two. He puts a hand into the spire to steady himself and finds his fingers passing through ideas instead of stone for the length of a heartbeat. Holt's jaw tightens. She does not call for retreat. She does not call for attack. She says, "Contain. Do not kill unless it declares war on us. This is a tool sent by a hand that did not sign my orders." The Colexus stands and breathes and makes the shadow of the crown look like a hole instead of a shape. It turns its skull face toward the beast, and the animus speculum opens like a flower made of rules. The world near it becomes a place where meaning has to pay taxes it never needed before. Power scaling. Interlude. The pariah gene in a Colexus assassin is a hole cut in the warp where souls cannot find purchase. The beast is more soul than flesh, so standing near that hole makes him bleak concepts. The animus speculum focuses this absence into a ray of unmaking that drinks warp pressure like a lung, and its drink becomes a weapon. Noctilith amplifies edges between thought and matter. The assassin's field will climb the crown like frost climbs a window frame, and will enter the beast through every line that carries his will into the world. Sisters of Silence create a quiet. A Colexus creates a hunger that eats the choir itself. The Justicar steps forward, sword pointed down, the sign of parley. "Agent," he says, voice iron. "We stand beside those who sent you. Name your orders." It does not answer with words. Most Colexus do not unless someone nearby's soul is loud enough to borrow mouth. It tilts its head toward Holt as if checking if she is a door or a wall. Holt lifts her rosette. The assassin's field licks it and the sapphire seems to dim. "You will not fire," she says, and she is factual. "You will not approach civilians. You will coordinate with this command until your temple answers a hardline call." It does not nod. It does not kneel. It simply stops moving. For something that eats movement from ideas, this is an act of grace. The beast feels the pain ease to an ache he can catalogue. He withdraws his hand from the spire and his fingers are fingers again, not lines struggling to be real. He hates the feeling without the word hate. He's not used to being made into less. Voss smells ozone and iron and something like old tears. "If that mask faces the wrong way," she says, "my men will forget their own names long enough to die quiet." "They will not," Holt says, and her tone is a grip. "We will place it where its field points up at the crown and out at the void. We will show it a target we choose. Malakar won't like it," the Justicar murmurs. "He'll send words built to taste like prayer, to a thing that cannot taste. Malakar does not know yet. He stands in a basilica of scaffolds 2 levels below and paints sigils with the blood of a slave whose name he forgot to learn. He plans to nail the city's next thought to a sentence that ends in teeth. Holt opens a channel to a frequency that her rank has no right to access. "Temple," she says. "Report." No voice answers. A code arrives instead, a sequence of numbers that add to a kind of permission. The Officio Assassinorum has heard and will allow a delay before the shot. That is generosity measured in seconds. The Colexus tips its skull imperceptibly. It will wait. Voss rubs her eyelids with 2 knuckles and sees sparks before she opens them. "We won the first round and invited a knife to the table," she says. Holt nods. That is what winning looks like in a place like this. The beast drags breath through a throat scraped by winter and looks at the sky. The dropships are not done. The void above is a bruise. He tastes a new note in the rain, a metallurgy sharpness that means someone replaced water with eager metal. A covenant of word-bearer warpsmiths begins to wire the storm to a logic that makes ruins obedient. He turns his head until the spire's crown is not a weight on his back, but a mark on his horizon. He understands he must move while the Hole Walker breathes nearby. He does not like walking near it. He will do it anyway. They move together, a procession no saint ever imagined. At point, a sister captain whose silence is a sacrament that bruises. Flanking, 2 grey knights with blades singing in low notes. Behind them, Holt, Voss, and Loom Tertius, the last muttering to machine spirits about dignity. At the rear, like a winter carried by men who need everything to be harder. The Colexus, its field pointing outward where the crown meets the sky. Beside the spire, as constant as the tide, the beast. They cross a bridge of grating where rain falls in ropes. Below, 1,000,000 gallons of water try to forget gravity. Voss glances down and then away, not superstitious, just unwilling to invite the sump to remember her name. Malachar finds the bridge first and sends a wave of cultists up its spine. Men and women with eyes full of splinters and mouths full of hymns that hurt breath. They carry icons made of welded cutlery and hope. They mean to throw themselves around the beast's feet and be the rope that trips him. The Colexus faces them for a second, and 20 forget pending sins and remember only that their mothers once rubbed their backs when they coughed. They drop icons and curl like leaves scorched by shade. The field moves, and they blink and do not know why they are on the floor. "Keep it off, civilians," Voss says through clenched teeth. "Use it like a scalpel." The Justicar raises his sword and points at a macro cable that feeds the crown's east quadrant. "Cut there," he says to the beast. He does not cut with teeth. He uses the same pressure he used on the flood, making a hand big enough to touch a kilometer of cable without breaking the world around it. He pinches, twists, and the macro cable's core snaps without a flare. The lights in the east quadrant flicker in sequence like soldiers bowing. Loom Tertius laughs in spite of himself, ugly and delighted. "Well done," he says to the ocean. A word bearer. Warpsmith sees the macro cable fall and throws a length of chain at the beast's arm. The chain oily with script signs that should not mean anything and mean everything. It bites and tries to teach the arm to be a bridge to a pit. The Colexus turns its face toward the chain, and the script slips like butter off a hot knife. The chain is chain again, heavy and indifferent. The Warpsmith curses in the old tongue and calls for a name that does not arrive. They enter the crown's final gallery, a cathedral of angles that a human skull cannot read without consequences. Holt's eyelids twitch. Voss feels a headache that will be slow and mean. The sisters widen the cold until the angles recede to where minds can step without breaking ankles. Selland Vesk is not there. He fell and crawled and fell and found a grate where maintenance becomes sacrament and slipped through into the ducts. He's heading for the void antenna to send a message to someone he calls an uncle and someone else calls a jailer. He is not today's problem. He is tomorrow's. At the apex, Malakar waits. He has come up through shafts only word-bearers remember, bearing an icon made from a servo's skull and a child's toy wrapped in skin. He plants it and smiles into the rain. Parley, he says, which is always a lie in his mouth. Words, Holt says, and her blade is a line. Make them earn oxygen. Malakar bows as if court were in session. You built a crib for a god that does not love you, and now you argue about whether to let it chew your thumb. You are charming in your refusal to accept a gift from those who understand appetite. Your gift is war without end, the Justicar says. We already have one. Your war is obedience, Malakar replies. Ours is romance. We love the void and it answers with kisses that burn longer than your prayers. Voss aims her pistol at his helm. My patience is not an infinite resource. You would shoot from boredom, Malakar says. I would shoot from faith. We are not the same. He lifts his staff and brings it down. The floor does not break. The sentence does. Words roll out that are not for human mouths, and they do not enter human ears. They crawl along steel and into the crown, seeking the crown's long habit of focusing whatever song it hears. The Calexus turns and breathes hunger toward the words. The hunger is not like eating. It is like the absence that winter provides and summer envies. The words go into it and come out smaller, brittle as old paint. The beast hums his hard lullaby again. Not at people now, not at demons, but at the crown itself, at the habit. He sings the habit sleepy. It tries to lock into a focus, and instead yawns and thinks about tides. Malakar frowns. He is not familiar with a building that refuses to be a cathedral. Holt moves while he thinks. The sisters create a lane where scripture goes to die. The Justicar steps into that lane as if stepping into an old photograph he recognizes and meets Malakar in the space where meaning used to be. Their words strike and cancel. Their weapons do not. The Justicar's sword bites the staff and finds under scripture the servos that keep a lie standing. Sparks fall like tired stars. Malakar twists and the staff's head opens to show a mouth of iron teeth that bite. The Justicar bleeds where armor is not, and the blood is clean because he lives clean. Voss sees an angle and takes it. She throws a charge past both men and plants a second on the icon. On my mark, she says. We collapse this balcony and plant the assassin like a statue where the crown can drink its field. Do it, Holt says without looking. Malakar hears the word assassin and throws a curse designed for blanks. It should slide off like rain. This one has teeth sharpened on the bones of an old temple. It bites the edge of the Calexus's field and finds a seam not in the pariah, but in the world the pariah stands in. The assassin staggers for the length of a blink. The animus speculum's iris shutters and opens again, very slow. Holt's mouth tightens. She files the information. She will pay for the knowledge later. The beast sees the assassin tilt and moves his hand an inch closer, a continental swerve that makes the rain run in new paths. He's not fast, he is geometry. He puts his fingertip over the assassin like a roof for half a second. The curse goes by like a gust hitting an alley and finds empty space. The assassin stands without acknowledging the shelter, because it would not, if it could. Mark, Voss says, and she clicks. The balcony drops with a sound like a cliff sighing. The icon falls into the sump and the rain hisses on it, and it goes out like a foul candle. Malakar staggers, catches himself, and laughs because he is pious enough to find joy in discipline's pain. Again, Holt says, they force him back without killing him. Killing him here would invite a revenge that the Hive cannot afford today. He retreats with words that promise a worse tomorrow and that is a promise he can keep. He leaves the apex to them because he understands that his lesson will be louder if he teaches it at street level among the people who will be told who saved them and who endangered them. The Collector stands at the crown's edge and directs its hunger into the void. The crown hums and refuses to become a lens. The beast keeps one arm around the spire like a man hugging a friend through grief. The War Council returns to the Winter Garden and reports that the apex is held. The air is exhausted. The city smells of wet metal and effort. The Shrinekeeper lights a thin stick of incense and breaks it in two for luck. No one says thank you. They simply breathe. First victory, Holt says, and she does not smile. Now the bill comes. Voss stands with her hands on the table and looks at the section still red. We need food lines by morning, or the fights we just stopped will start again with knives for bread. Helmar will call this a riot, the Justicar says, like a man spitting a seed. He will want to send enforcers to hit faces instead of carry water. Voss pulls the LHO stick from behind her ear and snaps it in half. Then Helmar can file a complaint in triplicate and staple it to a storm. My men carry water. Holt approves the heresy because it is loyalty to people, which is law before law. We plan for the smarter foe, she says. The word bearers are words with knives. The tyrant is knives with words. The second is easier to cut. Selland, Voss says. Gone to a radio we should have melted, Loom answers. We will catch him where transmissions want to be born. They are interrupted by the sense that the air has decided to take orders from someone else. The Colexus turns its skull toward the nave's entrance at the same moment Holt does. 3 robed figures step in with the easy gait of men who have worn power-like clothing since they were young. At their center walks a woman with helm under arm and hair like white wire. She wears a rosette larger than Holt's. She wears patience like a flak vest. Inquisitor Magister Verina Solas, Holt says, and the words could be respect or warning. Severine, Solas replies, glancing once at the hololith and once at the Colexus. You did not ask before borrowing knives from my drawer. I asked, Holt says. Your drawer answered after the blade arrived. Solas's eyes moved to the beast, visible through a broken arch like a mountain that learned to kneel. You bought ours with a borrowed god, she says. The receipt comes due. Will you pay with your soul or mine? Neither, Holt says. We will pay with plans. Solas walks to the table, sets her helm down, and looks at Voss and the Justiciar and the sister captain, as if measuring if they are the right shape to fit into a hole the city has. Tell me your calculus, she says. Convince me this thing is not the first breath of a last mistake. Holt does not beg. She lays out the crown's denial, the control collapse, the assassin's placement, the beast's use of pressure as infrastructure. She does not hide the costs, the scrape on thought, the nightmares turned to food, the reliance that tastes like addiction. Solas listens, mouth a line, eyes an engine. You still man your own sin well, she says. Now argue doctrine against yourself. Holt says the words that keep her honest. You cannot teach a city to sleep with a leviathan at the door and expect it to wake without teeth marks you only see years later. You cannot bow to appetite and call it strategy. You cannot dull the knife that kills you later by letting it cut your enemies now. Voss clears her throat. Permission to speak treason. Always, Solas says. We're already in bed with the worst gods, Voss says, gesturing up at the roof where 1,000,000 skulls worth of prayers rest in dust. We just write their names in high Gothic and pretend that changes the teeth. The Justicar nods once, as if conceding a small terrain feature he never cared to die for. The measure is not purity, he says. It is command. Do we command the thing's hunger, or does it form our orders by existing? The Calexis shifts half a step, and everyone feels the room grow an inch colder. Solis watches the pariah and the beast in the same glance and becomes a diagram. "We can measure that," she says. "We can cut if the line tilts the wrong way." Voss tilts her head as if listening to Rain tell a joke. "With that," she means the pariah, "you will tear the Hive's breath to rags before you finish the cut." "Better rags than ash," Solis says calmly. "But I am not here to burn your city, Marshal. I am here to hold Holt on a leash while she runs toward a fire, and to cut the leash if she tries to bring the fire home." Holt doesn't rise. She bows a fraction. It is not subservience. It is speed. "Then leash and run," she says. "We have a transmission tower to deny and a warpsmith coven to scatter." The Calexis lifts its mask a finger width more, and the animus speculum's iris opens to a new size. The beast snarls without sound, and his plates crawl, unhappy with the nearness of nothing. He chooses not to move away. Choice is a habit he is cultivating with effort. The War Council ends without closure, because War Councils don't close when work remains loud. They move. Orders become motion. The city obeys as much as it can. The smarter foe defines itself as they climb. A field laid by warpsmiths whose sigils target patterns in thought rather than objects in space. A mimetic barbed wire that twists dreams until they abrade waking choices. The first man to touch one screams not in pain but in confusion, forgetting the steps between wanting to move and moving. Holt orders the wires sprayed with promethium and burned without looking at the shapes the flames make. An Escher chemist improvises a foam from sump sludge and priest incense that coats the sigils and turns them into jokes that the fire knows how to tell. "Artisanal sacrilege," she says deadpan, as she sprays. Voss writes her name on a list of people who will get medals if the city still has metal. They reach the transmission tower, a needle stabbed into a sky that keeps trying to push the needle back out. Malachar is there with two warpsmiths whose mouths are tattoos, and a host of cultists arranged in a spiral meant to echo a script only the floor should hear. Holt breaks the spiral by stepping into it and drawing a line across it with her blade. The sisters widen the hole. The Justicar goes for the warpsmiths, because if he cuts their hand, Malachar's staff will be a stick pretending to be a hand. The first warpsmith raises a weapon that is not a gun so much as a contract that ejects hot metal. The Calexis faces him, and the weapon's logic misfires because it was meant to cut something present in the warp. And there is no warp here to cut. The bullet drops out of reality 3 inches from the muzzle. The warpsmith recalibrates in the language of pain. Malachar throws a word at the beast that has learned the shape of the Calexis's field and knows where the seam was. It misses because seams move when you hold them under pressure and song. The beast hums and the tower hums back. The word unravels into letters and the letters lie down like snakes in winter. The first victory's echo becomes a second. The tower does not send the message Selland wanted. It does not send the confession Malachar wanted either. It sends nothing but rain. Voss grabs a cultist trying to bind a melter charge to a strut and kneecaps him with a baton, because she is kinder than shooting him through the spine. "Sleep this off," she says, and he cries because someone gave him a choice he did not have to earn. Holt slams the kill switch that should have been scrapped a century ago and feels the tower's heart go silent. "Done," she says, and she hears how thin the word is. The Calexis tilts its skull again. Holt feels a hand she has never held close over her shoulder. Solis's voice crackles through the vox like frost on old copper. "Your seconds are spent," she says. The temple asks for a decision. "Do we shoot it now?" Holt looks at the beast. He has his hand on the spire again, and his head bent as if listening to stone. He is very ugly and very deliberate. He is not a prayer, and he is not a curse. He is work. No, Holt says, not yet. We have not bled enough on the right floor to earn that shot. Solis considers a scale they both know and nods once in a room Holt cannot see. We hold, she says. We keep the blade aimed. Teach your god a trick and tie it to a tree. The Colexus closes the iris a fraction, as if annoyed or pleased. It is not either. It is itself. The beast looks at the assassin and then at Holt and then at the sky. He cannot speak. If he could, he might say that he will be fed the way a storm is fed, by pressure, by difference, by the work of others. If he could, he might say he intends to take that food from those who would drown the city instead of those who would sleep in it. The smarter foe chooses a new angle. A mimetic hex runs not along walls but along the voices of children crying for parents. It spreads in the band of sound that travels without seeing. The city flinches as the hex teaches reluctance to be saved. Men stop mid-step in stairwells because their feet believe the lower steps are hungrier than the upper one. Holt hears it and hates it more than any demon's roar. She orders all Vox to play a hymn every citizen learned as a child, an ugly song with a steady beat and a refrain about turning wheels until your hands bleed. She hates the doggerel. She uses it anyway. The hex stumbles on the rhythm, and the city moves a step. The Justicar catches the second warpsmith's hand and cuts the tendon he promised. The warpsmith drops a tool that was about to draw a sigil on the air. It falls like a confession. The Grey Knight stamps it into the floor. Malachar reels and plants his staff and lurches into a retreat that looks like choreography. He is good at losing in ways that feel like victories. He promises the city another lesson and leaves smoke that smells like wet books. Holt wipes her blade on a piece of cloth that used to be velvet. She does not look at the cloth while she ruins it. She looks at the beast's hand on the spire and at the assassin's skull turned to the void and at Voss's boots that are soaked and at Loom's trembling hands. She catalogues costs. They walk back over the bridge. The sump frowns and gurgles and forgets 3 names out of spite. The city breathes. The beast hums very quietly to himself, and the hum moves a sluice gate 2 kilometers away, because he set it that way with pressure earlier. No one sees it open. They only see dry steps. In the winter garden, Solis waits with a small cup of recaf and 2 more forms to sign that say she is part of the day. She sets them down and points at the hololith. The smarter foe, she says, and a new glyph appears over a sector near the crown. Not the priest, not the chaos, the hole that walks. It tore your beast a little. We saw, Holt says. We will keep it pointed outward. If it turns, we cut it off our table. And if the beast turns, Solis asks. Holt watches the rain drop from his plates and thinks of the boy with the lunch tin and the boat with the jam jar and the engineer squid. He is already turning, she says. He is learning to turn toward us, not out of love, out of math. Math is faithful, the Justicar says, when it is written with blood. The Sisters of Silence stand and do not bless. They do not need to. Their presence is the blessing that keeps pageantry from becoming poetry when knives are required. The Colexus is a hole in the edge of the room. The beast is a mountain at the edge of the sky. Between them stands a city that hates both and needs both, and will consider naming a street after one and a cold day after the other. They plan for the duel coming because you cannot avoid a storm by denying clouds. Holt lays the map where the pariah's field overlaps the beast's tolerance. The Justicar marks where the word-bearer will try to nail a new word to the stone. Voss names alleys where her people will die if the plan is beauty without dirt. Luma Tertius hums to machine spirits until a cogitator stops sulking and offers a better route for water. At sundown, that cannot be seen, the alarm passes through the hive with the speed of an ugly truth. A black ship of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica breaks orbit on an emergency vector, drawn by the stink of psychonauts bled into the void. It is a world that collects worlds. It carries sisters in numbers that make silence law. Signal it, Solis says, eyes on Holt. Tell them what we hold and what we refuse to do without face-to-face orders. Holt nods. We hold a crown, she says into the void. We hold a promenade. We have a pariah and a leviathan, and a contract not yet written. You may not kill either yet. The black ship does not answer. It does not have to. It is the answer to questions most worlds do not dare ask. It burns toward the hive anyway. The beast looks up and does not see it. He feels the sisters aboarded, the way a reef feels winter 2 months before the first storm. He settles his plates and makes himself lower so the wind passes overhead instead of into his head. He's not afraid. He knows only schedules. In the nave, Holt rests her palms on the table and feels pain in both wrists that is either strain or a warning. She ignores both. We got our win, she says. Now we prepare for the fight, where the knife knows our names. She turns her head toward the door. A child stands there with a blanket around shoulders and eyes like nailheads. He holds a dented lunch tin. A sister stops him with a hand that is soft when she chooses it to be. He is not for us, Holt says. He is the reason we do not turn this into a pageant. Voss kneels to the child's height. Your mother. He shakes his head once. A big hand pushed the water, he says. It was cold. It was nice. Voss nods and stands and looks at Holt. If we kill it while it holds the flood, I will shoot the person who gives the order, she says conversationally. You will try, Solis says, and there is a ghost of amusement in the places where her face isn't busy. And I will appreciate the sincerity while I stop you. The Calexus turns its skull slightly toward the child, and then away with a precision that is respect if it could be. The beast turns his gaze toward the winter garden, and the boy feels looked at in a way that makes him straighten his shoulders without understanding why. He will carry that posture into a workshop one day and teach rivets to be faithful. Night is the same color as day. The city's generators hiccup and catch and wheeze. The sump forgets and remembers and forgets again. Word-bearers make new words and test them on air. The Calexus adjusts its field until the crown's hum stays inside a narrow lane, like a train forced to track. The beast hums and does not hum, and moves water in places where being a god looks a lot like being a janitor. The smarter foe moves a piece that the War Council did not expect. A Calexus like theirs, but stolen by word-bearers from a wreck 2 wars back, kept in chains of prayer twisted into cables. It wakes under a basilica of rust and remembers nothing except hunger. Its mask is broken, its field a torn bag that leaks night. Malachar calls it bride and steps back carefully because faith does not protect you from winter. Holt's vox clicks with a whisper that is not a message so much as absence, sent as mail. She looks up. The Justicar is already moving. The sisters stiffen as if wind found their bones. The hole and the mountain will meet something that is both. The jewel sharpens on the map without anyone drawing a line. They move because that is what people do when the night brings a lesson with knives. The winter garden turns into a briefing pit. Holt stands with Solis, Voss, the Justiciar, the sister captain, Loom Tertius, and the pariah waiting like a plug storm. The hololith shows a red basilica squatting over rust canals and broken pumps. The word-bearer's impromptu shrine. Beneath it, a cold spot moving like a knife under a bedsheet. Their acid comes chained, Holt says. Officio pattern Calexus, designation unknown, stolen in a war we did not fight. The word-bearers call it bride. It will cross our pariah's field and make a resonance we cannot predict. Standard counters? Voss asks. Do not exist, the Justicar answers. No psychic barrage, no fearless charge. Bolter and blade only protect men. They do not protect meaning. The crown makes all edges sharper, Loom says. Noctilith will carry absences as easily as it carried songs. If the fields couple, they will turn corridors into drained places. Civilians will forget how to climb stairs. We shape the fight, Holt says. Sisters define the lane. Pariah points outward. We bring water. Voss blinks. Water. The Justiciar nods. A physical medium that refuses to remember shapes long enough for a beam to keep perfect focus. We diffract their absence with pressure. We wrap our god with the city it wants to hold. Holt doesn't soften the next part. Collateral. Moderate to severe. We will lose some who cannot take the cold. We lose all if we wait. Solace draws a finger along the basilica icon. Malachar is the leash holder. Cut the leash. End the sermon. We cannot kill the assassin, Holt says. We can deny the sermon. The Colexis tilts its skull as if it understands orders the way a knife understands a map. They move. Enforcer barges nudge into rust canals with loads that never belonged in boats. Sump pumps, fire mains, chem foam, bundles of barbed line. Esker chemists peel labels off drums with their teeth. Orlok riggers sling nets over chains of scripture. House Goliath sends 4 brutes with shoulders like forklift masts to carry a sister's silence engine. The beast waits beside, one arm along a wall to brace it, another under a walkway to keep it from sagging. He draws the sump's old lungs to cough on command. He remembers weather and pretends to be it. Basilica of rust, stained girders, drips like clock ticks. Malachar stands on a pulpit welded from bridge struts, staff planted, helm raised. Chains descend to a dark shape on the floor below, small, thin, skull-masked, a cocoon of barbed prayers around it. The chains move the way snakes do when you step near them. Witness the bride, Malachar says to the red ranks, and the men whose faith is knives. Witness winter married to hunger. We give it the city's first vow. He yanks the chain. The Colexis doesn't stumble. It does not have enough world under its feet to allow that kind of movement to be seen. But something shivers in all nearby throats. A lantern guttering in the corner goes out without smoke. Holt raises her hand. Sisters split like a black river around the edges, laying cold lanes. The Justicar advances into the center, sword lowered, full awareness that there will be no hero's charge today. Voss takes the stair on the left, with a squad loaded with foam. Orloks throw lines. Goliaths shoulder the engine. The beast slides into the canal beside the basilica and lifts water without lifting his hand, pressure becoming a curtain. Hold, Holt says quietly into the Vox. Make them step into our cold. Do not step into theirs. Malachar laughs, the sound walking the girders like a cat. Parley, he calls. We offer marriage. You bring a chaperone shaped like a hole. Our chaperone bites, Voss replies, and she does not smile. The Colexis looks at the beast. A seam of coal opens in the basilica floor and walks up the wall to the roof. Rain outside hits that seam and becomes nothing, like thoughts that break on a blank stare. The animus speculum irises open with the hush of a book closing. The beast feels the beam before it is aimed. The world near his shoulder thins, not an explosion, not a cut, but a subtraction. He pours water into it, and the beam drinks the water and shrinks, still hungry, still straight. He leans so that the water is always between beam and thought. He is clever as tides, never in one place long enough for the same net to work twice. Malachar screams hymns that are verbs. The chain on the assassin tightens. The beam jitters and then locks. It hits the beast's forelimb where plates knit over old ridges. Plate goes to wet gravel. Gravel goes to silt. Silt goes to a silence so pure it is visible. A tunnel through him that light refuses to acknowledge. He roars. The sound flinches off the assassin's mask and refuses to exist near it. The roar returns to him 3 heartbeats late and tastes wrong. The Justiciar breaks 3 cultists with his non-sword hand because killing them would be waste. He angles his body to keep his shadow off Holt, while she does arithmetic with her blade. The sister captain steps into the lane with a silence engine behind her, and the air around her becomes a pressure that makes thoughts need paperwork. Now, Holt says into the Vox. Push water. Goliaths twist valves the size of coffins. Pumps that haven't worked since names were cheap cough, and then hurl cold back at the beam. The sump becomes a hose. The beam is still straight, but it now cuts a river and forgets where the river ends. The beast moves, not away, but sideways, making the beam dig a groove along armored ribs instead of drilling a well. The groove is white with frost. It smokes like a bridge in winter under a salt truck. He hates the place the beam is making in him, the way it refuses to be a wound. Wounds tell stories. This tells nothing and insists on staying. He reaches for the chain. It hates being touched by him and tries to rewrite his fingers as concepts it knows. He crushes it anyway. Words like barb and oath squeal as if they were physical and break under a pressure that does not respect theology. Malachar pulls, and the chain breaks. The assassin is free for a second. Freed things make their own decisions. This one turns its skull toward the largest pressure in the room. It drinks. The floor sweats cold. The beast loses a lantern eye. The light inside that eye goes out with the thin, sad sound of a firefly in a jar running out of air. He eats the debris of a falling gantry to keep it off civilians. Steel tastes like shipwreck. Sparks taste like coins. He finds nothing in that to fill the hollow the beam made. The Justicar meets Malachar at the pulpit. They do not speak. There are arguments that stop being words and start being footsteps. Sword meets staff. Staff opens into teeth again. Sword answers with a line that is not drawn on metal, but in the space that decides where metal is. Voss takes a cultist's icon and uses it as an umbrella to keep foam off her sightlines. She sees the assassin step toward the beast's face and makes a choice that will get her censured later. Pariah, she says. To me. She points at the assassin like a dog handler pointing at a wolf. The temple's Calexus turns. 2 fields kiss. The basilica rings as if someone has hit a bell the size of a subway. The contact is not explosive. It is emptiness meeting emptiness and becoming a wider winter. Holt's ears bleed. A sister goes to one knee and keeps her eyes open through pure refusal. Back 2 steps, Holt orders. Point up. The temple assassin obeys the geometry if not the voice. The winter lifts toward the crown. The city breathes a fraction. The beast sways. The tunnel through his limb widens and then stops widening because the water is there. He understands the lesson. Do not give the beam an unbroken path. Be stone islands, not lake. He makes himself archipelagos. He makes his thoughts archipelagos. Malachar whispers a word that slips past soldiers' ears and goes for the wound. It is a gentle word that mothers use to put hurt to sleep. It offers a lullaby inside the tunnel, a lullaby that belongs to 8 hands. It promises to fill the hollow with a choir that will never leave if he kneels. He is built of appetite and schedules. The word tastes like the schedule of eating without hunger. It is obscene and comforting. He could agree and never feel the beam again. He could eat the city into shape and call it charity. He refuses. Refusal is not a thought. It is a scar he draws across a choice. Price arrives with no courier. The tunnel does not heal. The beam pivots to the thorax, drinks, leaves a second silent mouth. Nightmares rise in a ring around the Hive like steam from hot iron. He has to reach for the city's dream river to keep his head together. There is no river. Holt cut the choir. He pays from smaller brooks, single sleepers, lone breaths. A dozen men wake with screams and cannot say why. A mother drops a pan because her hand shakes and curses him without knowing it is him. He feels every curse like a pinprick in a map. The sister captain steps forward with her relic, an iron plate taken from a ship that once carried psychers to the Black Ships and burned in half when a storm tried to write its name on the hull. She lays it against the beast plate where the tunnel shows. Her silence washes into him, not like a beam, but like snow packed into a wound. It hurts in a way he recognizes. Pain that says, I am meat, not pain that says, you are nothing. The beam shivers. The assassin tilts its skull, recalibrating the taste of the room. The temple pariah turns its mask a hair, and the animus speculum's iris narrows, a courtesy to geometry, not to flesh. The Justicar finally takes the staff's mouth off with a cut that would be poetry if it were not work. Malachar laughs with the real joy, because he has found a man who can make him work for his lies. He throws a handful of dice carved from saints' finger bones, and a dozen small diamonds pop like blisters around the grey night. They bite and are bitten. Blood writes the pulpit into scripture no one can read. Cut the leash, Holt says, and Voss hears the theatre and ignores it. She puts 2 shots into the chain block where rune meets winch. The block coughs sparks and stops moving. The assassin's tether goes slack and drops with the small sound chains make when they remember gravity. The assassin steps again. The beast is very tired. Tides know when to retreat. They also know when the coast must be taught to stand without them. He closes his eye that works. He leans and presses his head against the basilica's wall. He hums. The hum is not lullaby. It is work song. It sinks pumps none of these men built. It sends a shudder through the canal. A hidden sluice opens like a held breath released under the assassin's feet. Water becomes a moving stair that lifts the pariah off the floor and turns its face away to the high open in the roof, toward the crown where its hunger does less harm. The assassin does not fight the stair. It cannot. Fighting requires world, and it removes world. It rides the water because removal removes resistance. The temple pariah faces the same way, and their fields make an alley of nothing for rain and smoke to travel up. The crown drinks the emptiness and glows very faintly where it once sang. Malachar sees his bride depart and hurls 1,000 words. Voss sprays foam over the nearest 100. The sisters stand and let the rest die on their cheeks. Holt does not raise her blade. She raises her hand and points at Malachar like a promise. He withdraws into scaffolds and smoke because his sermon is over. He leaves a relic of someone else's god on the floor where he stood. Voss kicks it into the canal. The wound remains. 2 tunnels in the beast's mass, silent, rimed with frost that does not melt, margins inflamed with pressure that cannot pass. He flexes his limb and the tunnels whisper. He hates their voice. Loom Tertius calls up from a storm grate with dread in his tone. Field measurements show permanent attenuation, he says. Like scar tissue that is not tissue. We can scaffold function around it. We cannot fill it. The enforcers start coming down in lines to secure what secure means in a basilica like this. One sees the beast hollow and vomits from vertigo. He apologizes to no one and keeps working. Grey knights clear the pulpit of small demons with movements that would be holy if holiness were a verb. The Justicar gathers his breath and looks at Holt. He nods once, the concession a sword gives to a lion held by a spear. Holt plants a palm against the relic plate. The sister holds to the wound. "We will measure this later," she says to the sister. "We cannot replace you if you fall." The sister captain's voice is a flaw. "We do not exist to be replaced." The basilica goes quiet in its bones. The city listens through it. A sound like distance arrives. It is not thunder. It is thought forced into a wire and made to carry farther than it should. An astropathic choir aboard the black ship sets a seal and sends it down into the hive, a sigil not meant to kill, meant to be recognized by the thing that will face judgment. The mark touches the beast's mind like a brand lowered near, not on. He knows no emperor. He knows a pressure larger than seas. It feels like a cliff you cannot see the top of. It does not command. It weighs, and the weighing says, "Seen." Every sanctioned psyker in Hive Primus jerks as if strings pulled them. 2 die because their bodies know their limits and their souls do not. The choir on the black ship loses 3 and keeps singing because their captain orders them to, crying behind his teeth. Holt bows her head because the seal passes through her like a cold breeze and she is a door. Solace closes her eyes and in the dark sees the hallway of gold and bodies made of oaths. Voss's glow stick breaks in her pocket for no reason she will remember. The seal does nothing else, which is worse than if it had. It is not a shortcut. It is a sign. Reach the throne. "Message received," Holt says, jaw tight. She looks at the beast. "You will come," she says, as if telling a wave to cross an ocean. He leans away from the basilica, stepping back into rain, leaving the relic pressed to the tunnel until the cold becomes part of his plate. He does not nod. He pivots and the city redistributes weight under him. "Aftermath," Voss says, and the word tastes like rust. She lists the dead. Holt recites the losses in systems and options. Loom lists broken teeth and what gears he can make from them. The Justicar calls Malachar by name and promises a meeting with no pulpit. The beast lumbers away along the canal, leaving water that remembers being held. He carries the tunnels with him. The silence inside them eats tiny noises the way old carpets swallow secrets. Holt watches him leave and knows the corruption linger is not a taint of chaos, but a habit of absence. The wound will make him look at problems and want to solve them by removing the room. She makes a note of it in the place in her mind where she keeps men's sins and her own. They reconvene under the winter garden's dead vines. The map looks different. The basilica icon flickers from red to grey to pale. The crown's hum sits in the narrow lane the temple pariah keeps open. The black ship is now a sun no one can see. "We face the supreme authority," Solace says. "You will not keep this in the hive. You will walk out of the hive with it and go up." "Pilgrimage," the Justicar says, making a pilgrimage sound like logistics. "We prepare a corridor to orbit. We put blanks at the quarters. We nail faith down with cold iron and bolter discipline." Voss rubs her temples with both knuckles until sparks appear behind her eyes. "And if Helmar says no?" "We ask louder," Solace says. A message arrives from the governor's palace through 10 hands and 3 lies. Lord Helmar's seneschal writes in gold on wet parchment that the hive is stable and that the Inquisition may do as it likes so long as the lights return. Voss tears the parchment in half and uses it to start a burner under a teapot. Holt calls the Justicar's microship. "We assemble an escort," she says. "Grey Knights, Sisters, Enforcers who will not cause fights in hallways, Mechanicus who know how to apologize. We go up with our God." The beast stops at the promenade where he first knelt and looks at the jam jar light boat tied now to a post. The jar is still. The candle is gone. The boat rocks gently in a wake made by no visible vessel. Temptations end where work continues. Corruption lingers where hunger remembers new routes. He lowers his head and pushes a pile of collapsed steel into a shape that will be a hull when someone who is not him has time. It is a small thing, scaled for hands, not plates. In the nave, Holt feels the seal again, far and patient. She thinks of terror not as a myth, but as a place where air has a taste. She thinks of the throne not as furniture, but as an engine running on a man. She does not dislike engines. She dislikes men turned into them. She will go anyway. Recap, Solis says, because a mind can only carry so much chaos unstructured. We denied their lens. We tore their leash. Our asset is wounded by a concept that leaves holes. The Emperor summons by seal. We travel. We will be weighed. Holt nods. Prepare mortals to survive the corridor. Make the beast a shape that fits inside ships. Ask him to learn this once. The sister captain looks at the tunnels and at the relic plate cooling there. I will walk beside it, she says. My silence will not be absent. It will be a wall any hunger must climb. Voss lights the tea and stares into the tiny flame. We leave tonight, she says, deciding without permission because permission will catch up. Before Malachar writes a new word on our backs. A runner arrives with a slate and eyes too bright. Inquisitor, she says to Holt, breathless. The Mechanicus found humor in an old docking clamp. It will hold something heavier than lore. We can tie him to a hull. Good, Holt says, and she breathes out a little. Tell them to polish their humility until it shines. Outside, rain thickens into strings you could tune an instrument on. The hive groans in a key that means travel. The beast turns his head toward the crown and then toward the night sky beyond it. He does not wonder. He does not hope. He calculates. As the procession forms to drag a god into a ship, Kellen Fesk sits in a duct with a vox needle jammed between two teeth and whispers a signal up past the crown and the black ship and the clouds. He speaks to a thing that is not chaos and is not quiet. It listens because boredom is rarer than hate among stars. It considers sending a shard of itself where hunger is a language. It decides to send a message first, a piece of light that behaves like a knife. It will arrive on the way up. Holt's skin prickles without cause. She catalogues the feeling under debt. They walk. The beast lowers himself along plates that were not designed to be ramp. The Calexus points its field outward like a lighthouse no one loves. The grey knights take flanking positions at exact distances that make geometry sleep. The sisters move like cuts. The city watches. It does not cheer. It holds the door without being asked. Codex note. Pariah wounds do not close. They become habits in matter where the warp cannot rehearse itself, forcing living systems to root around absence with cost in time, breath, and thought. They reach the void docks under a sky that refuses stars. A gun cutter waits with its back open like a careful mouth. Men run cables from clamps to plates, lines dipped in oils that do not offend machine spirits. Loom Tertius directs with a voice that has found a gear he did not know. The beast sinks, plates scraping basalt pylons until sparks walk his skin like insects. He places his arm across the hull spine. The hull creaks and decides not to break. Water runs off him in sheets and makes the dock remember rivers. Holt walks to his eye and lifts her chin. We go up, she says. He leans closer, careful not to make the dock into a memory. His lantern-less side shows the tunnel like a throat without meat. He steps where she points. Up becomes the only direction the hive can think about for a minute. Engines call the wind to their mouths. Lines take weight. The gun cutter shakes. The black ship above hums and the seal miscarries small particles of hope into the air. The dock's vox blares a hymn no one likes. and everyone sings badly together. They rise. The basilica of rust falls behind, small enough to fit in a hand that would crush it by accident. Malachar watches from a scaffold and smiles because he is more patient than his armor suggests. Holt stands under a hatch with Solis, the Justicar, the sister captain, and Voss, feeling the climb like a count. "We will be judged," she says to no one and to all of them. Voss didn't plan to speak here. She does. Make sure they weigh our dead with us, not as ballast, as witnesses. The black ship turns an eye that is a hole and a light, and they ascend towards it like sinners toward an altar built by engineers. Behind them, the basilica swallows its fires. Ahead, the void has a shape it will show them later. Between, the tunnels in the beast's mass whisper. He does not listen. He has other holes to fill. The black ship's hold is colder than ideas. Hexagram plates glow under frost. Null engines hum like patient knives. The beast lies in a cradle of adamant spines, chained by geometry, not metal. Every chain is a clause. Every clause has a cost. Medici set up under shrine banners in a side bay. Sister physicians clean Voss's split knuckles. Sew a line on the Justicar's upper arm with a needle that hates speed. A servo skull burns incense in patterns that mean, "Be sterile," in a language flesh pretends it understands. Holt stands with Solis beneath a mural of the Astronomicon, painted in dust and gold leaf that refuses to peel. "Cost," Solis says, voice low enough to be mistaken for prayer. He eats nightmares and floods and the edges of words. We feed him work. We call it virtue. It looks like addiction with good lighting. "Dogma," Holt answers. We draw lines so hard they scar. We call them laws. We forget they were written after disasters, not before. "You soften," Solis says. It is not an accusation. It is a bearing. "I sharpen where feel makes better angles," Holt replies. "This city taught me. He taught me. Both took blood." The Justicar listens and says nothing. He wipes his blade dry with a cloth that used to be velvet. He has the patience of stone and the courtesy of gravity. Voss drinks boiled tea from a dented tin, while a Medicae tapes the tea burn on her thumb. The temple pariah stands at the bay's throat. Field pointed outward, skull mask a fixed door. Sisters of silence line the cradle in a phalanx of quiet that equals architecture. The beast does not sleep. Sleep is a surface he cannot trust on this ship. A novice astropath sits cross-legged and hums to herself, a threadbare tune about wheels turning until your hands bleed. She keeps the tune because it reminds her that hands are still allowed. A Medicaid chaplain passes and touches her shoulder, blessing the tune and the hands. Recap pulse. They severed the lens, broke the leash, and carried the hunger to a ship that can hold a storm. Judgment waits ahead. Something else waits between. Transit happens at the pace of liturgy. The ship burns out of a Necromunda's sky with muffled thunder, then climbs where blue turns to bone grey and then to black. The sump shrinks into a wet line slapped onto memory. Engines complain with a sound that would be screaming if machines were allowed to scream. Holt and Solis walk a chapel corridor, lacquered with prayer as data. Candles gutter in gravity that needs reminding. "You are my mentor," Holt says, not for flattery. "Tell me I err when I err." Solis looks at the ceiling, where saints lose eyes to gold. "You err when you love tools," she says. "You err when you despise them for being sharp." "Then I err every day," Holt says, and it is almost humour. "Then you are employable," Solis replies. "But hear me, doctrine is not a cage. It is weather. It sands away your excuses." The beast stares through a view slit the size of a cathedral door. Void rolls by like a clean thought. The pariah scars in him whisper. He counts the whispers the way a tide counts peers it has to slap. In the Medicae, Luma Tertius examines a shard of Noctilith cut from the crown. He sets it near the relic plate and watches Frost and Light argue in lines. "We can shore his wound," he murmurs, "with cold that is not absence, scaffolds, bridges. We cannot give back what the hole took." "Then teach him to love bridges," Voss says, chin propped on a crate. "Not the holes." The black ship's choir sings behind bulkheads. "You do not open without permission from men who carry keys in bone." Their song is not pretty. It is the sound of discipline stretched to wire. The Astronomicon pulsing through it is a lighthouse built on a man. Everyone in the bay pretends they do not hear the man. Mid-transit, the ship shudders as if remembering oceans. The navigator's sanctum rings once, a pitch that makes teeth ache. Holt looks up as if someone tapped her shoulder who was not in the room. "Contact," Voss asks, already moving. "Not in the warp," the Justicar says. In the absence beside it, the void outside puckers. It does not glow. It does not swell. It changes its mind and makes room for something that hates to be called a presence. Panels on 3 decks down, dim, as if deciding to be honest about how much light they never had. A line of stars vanish and then come back wrong. Mirafo enters without disrespect. It does not burn, because burning is a fool's romance. It arrives like mathematics correcting a map. A shard of a star eater slides into parallel, shaped like an equation that eats heat. Its skin is a sheet of night scrimshawed with abstractions no temple was meant to read. Where it looks, photons tire. Lum Tertius goes very still. "Catan," he whispers. "Void leviathan. A god that never learned to sing because it never needed to." The shard turns its knot face toward the cradle and sees the beast. It knows hunger by silhouette. It speaks without sound, and that silence says, "Optimize." The beast hears a plan drawn with knives. It is beautiful in the way clean rooms are beautiful. No dust, no doubt, no need. The plan says, unlace your compulsion to dream flesh. Eat spectra, eat haloplasma, eat heat. Your hunger will be equation, not compulsion. The price is obedience to a knife that has tasted suns. The void outside ripples as the shard demonstrates. It slides through a fragment of solar wind and drinks it. A whispering aurora dies before there is time for whisper. The black ship's heat sinks moan, and the Medicae's kettle goes cold in a breath. Voss blows on her tea and sees her breath. "Ward stations," Solis says. "Sisters split pairs, brace at quads. Pariah, face the void." The temple collects us, rotates its skull. The animus speculum's iris opens a fraction and points at a god. The field eats nothing because Catan are not warp. It eats the place where the shard's suggestion meets world. Suggestion bends. World refuses to kneel quickly. The Justicar steps onto the cradle's catwalk, eyes narrowed to cut glare that does not exist. "Do not answer," he tells the beast, without trusting the beast to understand words. Predators barter leashes for collars. Holt stands with one hand on the cradle rail and one on her rosette. "It will offer you a kindness," she says softly. "It will cost everyone else the sun." The shard speaks another sentence that looks like a theorem. "Allow me to cut your laws to sweat and story. I will turn you toward honest light. You will never think about people again." The beast tastes the promise. A tide that never has to smell rust or fear. An appetite that does not know gratitude or debt. A schedule that feeds without faces. He imagines a quiet the pariah tunnels cannot touch. He imagines never humming lullabies again, because nothing is left that needs sleeping. Temptation is precise. He molds it in his head and finds his claws inside it. He looks at Holt and sees a woman built of rails and choices. He looks at Voss and sees a mortal pretending not to be afraid so other mortals can breathe. He looks at the sisters and sees winter that chose to live in bodies. He looks at the Justicar and sees a blade that hates drama. He looks at Solesa and sees a general who will burn herself clean to keep children from burning. He refuses. It is not loud. It is not noble. It is a stone he places in a river and steps over. Price comes in light. The shard alloy shifts and throws a line of starlight so thin it behaves like a weapon. It skims the cradle. Hexagram plates hiss. The line touches the relic plate, set to the wound, and draws a white seam across it that hurts without throat or blood. The beast's tunnel flares, edges frilling like ice on a cracked glass. The temple pariah faces the seam and breathes hunger. The line wavers. It hates being asked to exist in a place that refuses to acknowledge meaning without paperwork. Sisters of Silence step in their quads and enlarge the quiet until even void sentence is edited for length. The black ship's choir does not sing at the shard. They sing to the throne. The Astronomicon does not brighten. It narrows. A lance of controlled radiance threads through the ship's spires and out into the void. It does not touch the shard. It touches the space behind it where choice is stored. The shard's plan crunches. Something golden puts a thumb on its page. Reach the throne. The choir whispers through teeth and iron and decks and bone. The shard stops showing kindness. It shows contempt. It cuts a slice of vacuum so thin that time forgets to stick. The gun cutter's nose dips as if gravity arrived late. A bolt of metal sweats from a rail and becomes dust. Loom Tertius, for one shuddering moment, sees every cog in the ship as a stack of lies told to friction. The Justicar slams a warding onto the cradle rail and pins it with a gauntleted hand. Voss clips a tether to her belt without looking down. Solace barks orders in a code that makes even the ship's shivering system stand up straight. The shard studies the golden thumbprint. It is not afraid of gods. It is bored by them. This one is not boring. It turns its face away from the black ship, like a cat deciding the door is not worth opening today. It drifts, indifferent, toward a region of space where heat looks like a seam in a coat. It leaves a taste that metal will remember. The kettle boils again. The medica keeps stitching without apologizing for the pause. Holt exhales and feels the seal brush her mind as if saying, "That was not yours to solve. Hurry." The navigator bleeds from his nose and laughs because the laughter tells his mouth that the bone is still his. The ship resumes a pace that knows the difference between prayer and pilotage. Gravity remembers its job. They translate. The navigator opens a window into the bad ocean and steers by a light that is a man on a chair. The black ship is wrapped in null. The warp snarls around it and cannot bite, because biting requires angles, and the null turns angles into mush. The beast feels the warp as a seafloor pressure on old bones. He keeps still while the pariah scars ache with cold comprehension. Chapel a Medici again. A sister tapes iron thorns across the relic plate to keep it seated in the tunnel. "This will not heal," she tells the beast, as if speaking to a cliff. "It will be yours until your end. Carry it as penance or as armor. I do not care which if your choice saves lives." Holt and Solace debate under a relic depicting a saint kicking a heretic downstairs, carved into the Himalaya. "Cost," Solace says. "We brought winter into a hive, and now we carry the winter to the sun." "Dogma," Holt says. "We refused a god that could have made all our days neat. We choose mess with a spine." "You speak like a general who expects to be forgiven," Solace says. "I speak like a woman who knows how forgiveness is bought," Holt answers. "With work, with days like this, and with the humility to die if the leash has to be cut." The Justicar sits with the temple pariah in the cargo well. They share silence like soldiers share a cigarette. "You and I," he says to the whole, "are unpleasant to be near and necessary. We both know what it is to watch a world decide to live in pain, rather than kneel for comfort. The pariah does not move. The air around it moves work harder to be air. Voss walks the cradle and points at bolts as if pointing at wings on birds. If this snaps, or will it crush? She asks. A tech priest answers in clicks that mean everything you love if you stand under it. She moves people one pace left. The black ship emerges into lawful dark. Worlds wheel like arguments resolved by force. Beacons ping. A picket frigate checks codes and glides back into its lane. A way station turns its guns away with relief measured in angles. They enter Sol System under the eyes of more guns than most wars. An escort wing peels out of Mars like a flock of knives that learn to prey. Mechanicus voices spark across Voxnet, delighted and angry that a thing like this rides under a seal like that. Terror rises, not blue, not gentle. A continent of storm held in place by stone. The Himalaya stab the sky and the palace spreads like armor married to mountain. The Astronomican spire is a wound in night that never scabs. The Tempest galleries glitter like a frozen choir. The Eternity Gate glowers like the mouth a god makes to tell you what you already know. The beast goes very still. It is not awe. It is recognition. He understands work when he sees it done without romance. Pageantry blooms like iron flowers. Custodians in gold take their stations with motion that is choreography and threat. Each spear is a statement. Sisters of silence stand at quarters, heads shaven, eyes like clear doors. Choirs of the Astra Telepathica line balconies, mouths closed, souls braced. Tech priests in ranks raise their mechatendrils with both joy and hatred for the thing they did not build. The black ship glides along engraved rails and kisses a berth shaped like a chalice. Bells ring that the beast cannot hear with ears. The city of cities holds its breath and then lets it go rhythmically, because breath is law here. The cradle lowers into a basin cracked with old heats. Null pylons wake and weave a lattice over the beast's back. He could break it if he chose. He does not. Choice is a habit. A custodian steps forward, helmet under arm, face stern in a way that is not cruelty. Inquisitor Severine Holt, he says, voice shaped by halls that accurate. By writ of the Senatorum and grace of the throne, you and yours are admitted to audience of weight. The leviathan attends as object of sentence, not as subject of prayer. Holt bows enough to be true. We accept the weight, she says. We bring a debt and a city's breath. Voss stares at a wall that is older than some species and thinks of her boys carrying water. She refuses to cry here because pageantry is not allowed to own her tears. The sister captain presses a palm to the tunnel and feels it resist, then endure. We will not let you speak where speech is sin, she tells it. Learn to answer with acts. They walk into the palace. Floors are patterns to teach feet humility. Walls are stone that remembers art as physics. Statues tell truths without flattering anyone who looks. The air tastes like the breath of a billion prayers boiled to their iron. Silent audience begins in a hall that has no acoustics, because acoustics imply noise. Blanks fill the edges. Custodians bracket the path. An ecclesiarch with robes like flame starts a word and decides not to say it here. At the end of the hall is a door you do not write. Through it, a glow that is not light, a pressure that is not wind, a presence that is not a man and entirely is. The Emperor does not turn his head. Heads turn around him. Holt steps onto a plate that has felt fewer feet than names carved in it. The rosette on her breast hums like a bee remembering a hive. Solace stands at her shoulder as leash and witness. The Justicar and a tribune of the Custodes exchange a glance that is function agreeing with discipline. The beast does not enter. The null lattice keeps him in an outer basin, ranked by spires that make his hunger count itself and find it wants less while it stands there. He feels a weight tilt his mind, as if a hand set a glass level on a table and pushed until the bubble centered. He has never been level. He is now. There are no words. There are images that are not pictures and decisions that are not sentences. Holt sees a tide roll back by nails and blood and intention. She sees the Imperium as a burnt city that refuses to move away. She sees mercy used as propaganda and doctrine used as cowardice. She sees knives used correctly and too often. She sees herself dying in 10 different rooms and living in 3 and being wrong in 5. Solace tastes a desert she has been crossing her whole life and realizes there was water under her boots the entire time, kept from freezing by someone she cannot admire without hating herself. She bows her head without hating herself. The Justicar feels a weight heavier than Titan's oath settle on his armor and discover no purchase to be ashamed of. He thinks of Malachar and knows which line he will cut first and last, and that they are the same. Voss sees nothing and feels everything. It takes the shape of a boy with a dented lunch tin standing up straight because someone looked at him the way mountains look at weather. She sets her jaw and files the feeling under street names later. The beast meets a will older than any ocean and hungrier than any desert and finds it is not a mouth. It is a furnace that wants to turn everything to work. A question arrives, not spoken. What is your hunger for? He answers by showing hours, bridges he held, water he shaped, wolves he ate that came out of skulls, the holes in his side that refused to heal, the hands he did not crush, the one hand he wishes he could forget, that he did not save because he did not see it until after. The presence weighs all of it with a kindness that is not softness. It shows him 3 doors as sketches, not choices. Later, for now, a clause. The Emperor's will slides along the pariah scars and draws a line that will not erase without permission. Every time the beast reaches for a sleeping mind, the line will burn. Every time he leans toward living men for sustenance, the line will flare, and 4,000 miles away a bell will toll and a lance will turn. If he sings in a city, he must sing toward demons, not toward beds. If he must feed on minds, he must feed after judgment, from those condemned and confessed, tithed under seal and measured in mercy that looks like arithmetic. Holt absorbs the clauses like frost learns walls. She nods because she agrees, and because agreeing hurts in a way that keeps you upright. Solace breathes out and accepts that this is both leash and gift. The Justicar memorizes the enforcement notes and looks forward to being unnecessary. Power scaling enters. 2. Under mandate, the beast may shape pressure and water at city scale without incantation, but must anchor every act to a mortal's plan signed in seal. Unanchored miracles will fail near shrines and sancta. His lullaby forces sleep on demons and beasts. On humans, it softens panic only when a sister of silence is within sight. Else it rebounds as nightmares in a tithe he will not be permitted to keep. He may feed on warp predators, mimetic vermin, and sanction despair tithed from condemned traitors under inquisitorial writ. Any unlicensed feeding will scorch his pariah scars and summon sanction. He cannot cross astropathic sanctums unless escorted by blanks. He cannot enter a black ship hold under sail. If he breaks bounds, the custodian spears will find tendon in him, even where tendon is idea. The audience releases them like a sea unpaused. The pressure does not lift, it becomes permission to move. A custodian tribune turns his head a fraction. It is equivalent to applause in that hall. Holt bows once more. She hears the phrase, as if at the end of a corridor spoken by no one. Reach the throne. It now means leave and return with your choice. They step backward the way you leave a forge. The doors do not close. Doors here are concepts, not hinges. Outside, the palace air is less heavy by one word. Later. Voss exhales and laughs once, short and ugly and honest. We did not die, she says. Today. Tomorrow volunteers, Solis says. And she is not joking. The beast lowers his head in the basin and feels the lines written through him cool to a bearable heat. He does not feel owned. He feels tasked. It is unfamiliar and tolerable. On a balcony above, a sister archivist writes a line in a book that is sold by fragments to men who will not live to see the final price. Leviathan weighed, she notes. Conditional. Bound to war's logic, not to priests. Holt turns to the custodian tribune. We will go down again, she says. Malachar will write another lesson on Necromunda's skin. We must answer. You will go down under escort and under law, the tribune replies, voice like low thunder. Blanks at your quarters, sigils on your hull. The throne remembers cities, Inquisitor. It is why he sits. Voss steps to the basin's lip and squints up at the beast's eye. Here are your rules, she says. Make them look like mercy when you can, like knives when you must. Do not lie to yourself about which is which. He blinks slowly, a tide acknowledging a key. The temple pariah lifts its skull an inch as if nodding to the throne. It cannot nod. It nods anyway. The animus speculum shutters to a slit while in the palace's shadow. Loom Tertius kneels because he knows he should. He also brings up a cogitator slate and sketches a scaffold for the tunnel's edges that uses relic plates, sisters' silence, and hexagram masonry. It will hold, he mutters. It will not heal, but it will hold. The Justicar looks east through walls that do not interfere with his sense of duty. On the wind that is not wind, he hears Malachar thumbing through a book and choosing a page. We go now, he says, before he fixes this lesson as scripture. Solis touches Holt's forearm, a light pressure. 3 paths will be shown, she says, voice almost gentle. You will advise. You will hurt. You will be wrong in some ways and right where it counts. Holt nods. We buy the city hours, she says. We spend them wisely. They walk out past statues that never blink. Terror watches them with boredom forgivable in old things. The black ship readies with a sound like patience moving its chair. The escort forms up in wedges and files. Custodes in gold, sisters like winter, grey knights like verdicts, enforcer representatives wide-eyed and trying to look like architecture. On the basin's rim, a child in a visitor's robe looks down and clutches a tin. He is not the boy from the gantry, but his eyes are the same. He lifts the tin a fraction, as if saluting. The beast does not know salute. He lowers his head until the child can see himself reflected small and brave in a plate. They depart. The palace's shadow stretches and shortens as if practicing a march. In the choir towers, voices start and stop in patterns that mean safe in the language air understands. The Astronomicon thunders without sound. The cradle lifts with a complaint that sounds like gratitude. Holt glances back one time because turning forward too quickly is superstition. She sees the gate and the gold and the cold and the work. Her jaw sets as if a vice found a reason to exist. Down, she says. Down, Voss echoes, rolling her shoulders. And bring the bill. The gun cutter noses into lanes that even Void is reluctant to call empty. The beast feels the mandate like a rope anchored to a star. It is not a leash, it is a direction. Hunger adjusts its stride, schedules update. The tunnels whisper less and then more, and then learn silence where they are told. Somewhere behind them, a sister closes a ledger and blows dust off a quill that has written 1,000 deaths and 3,000 reprieves. Somewhere ahead, Malachar picks up a skull and decides which tooth to carve next. Between, the ship carries a city's hours and a god's clauses toward a hive that remembers storms and has room for more. The return is a fall into gravity and obligation. Exhausted engines bite air. The cradle kisses rusted rails on the hive primus like a big ship docking in a tight harbour. Voxnets wake and shout and sing. Below, the sump remembers a tide that wore a crown and prepares its shoulders. They do not get hours, they get minutes. Red sigils bloom above the spire like ulcers. Vox choirs cough a new refrain through hidden speakers. Baptize in 8. Malachar has written another lesson on the city skin. Recap pulse. We went up and were weighed. Clauses were written inside a hunger. We come down with law welded to appetite. In the winter garden, Holt lifts her rosette and transmits the mandate in clear, ugly words. Anchor every act a mortal plan, she says. No unlicensed lullaby. Feed only on demons, mimetic vermin, and sanctioned despair under seal. Voss repeats it to officers who do not believe in gods, but believe in orders. The Justicar reads it once and knows where to swing. The beast leans against the spire and feels the lines burn, as if a hand traced his nerves with a hot stylus. He tries to draw breath from sleepers, and the claws flares like a brand held near skin. He pulls his hand back from the stove and does not try again. He hums for floods, and the hum staggers. No anchor. Holt plants the plan like a post in the ground. Hold the east causeways with pressure null-eyed, she says to him and to the city. Sisters visible on the line. The hum steadies, lawful and ugly and strong. Malachar's sermon moves through ducts and wires and memory. It teaches people to kneel to knives and call it romance. It coats emergency stares with reluctance. It stains prayer like ash. It calls to the wound in the beast, the silent tunnels, and whispers, "Fill yourself with us." He answers with law. He takes the sister's relic plate and presses it into the first tunnel until the edges scream and then stop. He takes a second plate from a black ship crate under custodian watch and presses it into the second tunnel while the temple pariah points its winter at the seam. The holes hold still enough for work. Solis stands at the table with Voss and Loom and the sister captain. 3 fires, she says. Spire choir station reoccupied. Vox hives broadcasting the plague. Basilica of rust lit again with script. We cut broadcast, then break the basilica. The choir we judge. Helmar, Voss says without hiding the taste of the name. Promise to restore lights with a lash. Solis replies dry. We decline the lash. We will borrow his generators. They move as if a metronome had learned to bleed. Enforcer squads anchor intersections with wire and discipline. Eshka crews run chem lines that turn Malachar sigils into grime. Orlocks climb lattice like spiders to rip speaker crowns down with crowbars. Goliaths carry the sister silence engine like altar bearers who have seen the god behind the veil and still go forward. The beast is the hill again. He sets his mast to break wind along the causeways, to make pressure corridors that ferry bodies toward light. He does not sing. He lays his plates under rain and will until a mortal says stop. At the choir station, Telenfesk has returned with the fraction of his jaw Voss left him and the rest stapled with iron. He has rethreaded 3 chairs and 1 crown and tied them into a new habit the city did not consent to. He hears the temple pariah's field coming like frost. He does not run. He never learned how. Holt enters with the sisters in a wedge that makes language short. Selland, she says, naming the sin with the man. You stole their sleep. You poured it into a machine. You broke the machine and called it choir. Judgment. He smiles with blood. You brought a god, he says. Eyes on the beast through the cracked glass. You made rules for it too late. We are already tuned. Holt lifts a writ that weighs as much as a street. Under seal, she says, and the letters are iron barbs. By the throne's mercy measured as arithmetic, the condemned despair of traitors is tithed for war. You, Kellenfesk, are condemned. Her voice does not rise. Your fear will feed what saves who you taught to drown. Voss chambers around and keeps her eyes on Selen's hands. Say something clever, she says, or don't. He tries to spit. There is not enough spit. Hunger remembers, he whispers, making the old motto into a sneer and a prayer. Good, Holt says. Then it will remember this. The sisters steady the room into winter. The temple pariah opens his iris a finger width toward the condemned traitor's soul and sips nothing. It is not the pariah's hunger that counts. It is the claws. The writ lights like a clean wound. A measured rope of sanctioned despair moves from Selen's chest into the beast tunnels as if poured along a line. It burns going in. It warms the relic plates until frost weeps and then seals. It does not sing. It is a tithe. Selen dies as if he were a machine being turned off by a careful hand. No show, no sermon. Voss lowers him with a forearm and does not let his skull hit stone. The beast does not shudder. He does not rejoice. He logs a job done and a bill partly paid. The tunnels go from holes to scars. Scars to maps you can read without losing yourself. Holt breathes out and does not apologize to anyone living for what she just spent. One, she says into the Vox. Proceed. The Vox hives fall next. Voss leads that cut without holiness. She kicks a door and shoots a speaker. The enforcers march through grease and prayer and pull cords as if strangling snakes. An Escher flips a breaker fashioned from cutlery and hope. A boy in a hallway hears the sermon drop like a bucket and remembers his name without swallowing blood. Malachar walks alone for a moment on a scaffold above the sump. He listens for his bride. He hears nothing where winter has taken a lane for itself. He smiles because he loves a fight that doesn't bore. He paints a symbol on the walkway with 2 fingers and a thumb and calls it a door. The basilica is last. The pulpit has grown teeth back. The floor is fresh scripture laid on rust and old blood. Malachar stands where he stood, staff capped with a new mouth welded from a broken icon. His voice is lower and more honest. Witness, he says to no crowd. Marriage failed. We are widowers. We drink. He throws the first wave himself. No proxies. A prayer that aims at the claws and tries to teach it shame. A hex that offers the sisters a childhood without silence. An invitation to the justiciar to put the sword down and live until he dies in bed. A promise to Voss that she will not have to carry water again if she kneels once. They do not break, not because they are stone, because they chose the knife that cuts them honest. Holt advances with the writ in one hand and her blade in the other. She points the writ at Malachar, and the writ refuses to recognize anything there that can be tithed. He laughs because that is true. We give, he says, voice warm. We do not despair. We romance. Then bleed, the justiciar says, and he gives him that romance. The duel is shorter this time. There is no bride to complicate lines. The staff bites and is broken. The sword strikes and writes a lesson on the pulpit in a line only one man will read. Malachar retreats a step and then another, arguing with love as his heel finds the edge of work. Voss does not shoot him. She lights 2 charges and walks like a woman taking a loaf from an oven. She plants them under the pulpit and steps back. On the hour, she says to Holt. On the minute, Holt answers. We make this a room that will not remember sermons. Sisters split and widen, making lanes so narrow even words cannot fit side by side. The temple pariah faces the ceiling and pours winter into the crown, so the hive has a quiet into which to stand. Loom pries plates off the floor where sigils have teeth. The beast puts his hand on the basilica's wall and squeezes very, very slowly. He does not crush. He changes pressure till the old rivets pop like knuckles, until columns give up their need to stand straight, until the roof thinks about being a hill and agrees to lie down. Malachar watches his church bend and does not rage. He grieves. "You will miss me when you have nothing to hate," he tells the Grey Knight. And he means it. "I have enough," the Justicar replies. And he means that. They fall back exactly as far as the plan says. On the minute, Voss clicks, charges flower. The basilica sighs and folds in on itself like a prayer closing. It does not explode. It does not sing. It becomes a memory underwater. Malachar climbs out of a side window and lands in sludge. He bows toward the spire because he respects anyone who keeps a schedule under fire. Third lesson later, he says to Air, "I will make it pretty." He walks away into rain without blessing and without fear. The Justicar lets him because the bill is not due here. He will be collected in the right room. Silence arrives like weather after a front. No sermon rides the conduit. No choir drinks heads. The sump is only itself. It stinks like work. Men start shouting at each other about food lines, which is a better argument than godlings. On the crown, the beast lowers his arm and rolls his plates. He makes a pressure that sends clean water into 3 cisterns he repaired 2 hours earlier. He does it under the claws. Holt anchors it with a plan and a signature, the ink still wet on her tongue. The city stands without romance. Its gratitude shows up as people picking trash out of drains because they saw a god pick up worse. They gather in the winter garden with rain dripping off dead leaves like commas. Solace looks at Holt and lifts a hand and puts it down again, a gesture smaller than forgiveness and bigger than thanks. "Now the choice," she says. 3 paths, not ours to take, ours to witness and weigh. Holt turns to the beast. She does not know if he will see what she is about to show. The seal on her breast heats and the world narrows. The hall in terror opens in a memory that is not past. The throne's pressure is a lens that shows 3 doors. First, return. He leaves this galaxy the way he came. Angles turning angles, hunger taking him to seas without people. Memory fades by edict, because memory breaks worlds when it migrates. The city forgets his weight, keeps his causeways. He forgets their names and keeps a shape that is easier and worse. This buys safety at the price of truth. Second, free agent. He remains without sigil or leash, outside writ, loved by none and useful to few, a storm hired by the day. Schism grows from every kindness he shows. Wolves learn to wear his lullaby and call it law. He saves and damns, uncounted and unbeholden. This buys speed at the price of trust. Third, sanctioned servant. He takes the sigil into his plates and the claws into his marrow. He becomes a tool of a throne that will never love him. He gains corridors through sancta under escort, access to tithe despair under writ, permission to shape pressure at city scale when anchored to mortal plans, and a leash that will burn him when he wants sleep to taste like conquest. This buys maximal impact at the price of self. The beast does not think in poetry. He sees tide tables. He sees a city's numbers. He sees one door that lets him move water without stealing breath, hunt demons without eating babies, breathe out lullabies that turn nightmares to smoke only when the right eyes are watching. He chooses. It is a pressure change, not a gesture. The null lattice on the basin in terror that remembers him brightens a fraction, as if saying, good. A spear somewhere lifts a millimeter away from tendon. The purge happens like engineering. The claws burns through old hungers that wanted shortcuts and flushes them into drains where sisters wait. The healing is scaffolding built from relic plates and mortal plan, not flesh. He is stitched with law. It will never be comfortable. He does not choose comfort. The transformation is visible. Over his basalt plates, a filigree of hexagram geometry pulsing faint gold grows like frost in reverse. It settles along seams and edges, not covering, defining. Where the plates meet at his chest, a two-headed heraldic shape, the aquila reduced to angles by a mechanicus artisan who learned restraint, embeds as a relief, not a brand. It does not say he is theirs. It says he carries their weight. The sister captain walks up to the relic plate and lays her palm on the warm geometry. Boundaries, she says, voice quiet and hard. Mercy is for the evacuee and the honest sinner who kneels without theatre. You will not sing them asleep. You will not drink their fear to spare yourself hunger. You will feed where writ allows. You will warn where pressure breaks. You will obey mortal plans anchored to law. You will refuse orders that make you a lie. Solace nods and accepts because her job is to accept laws that keep her knives honest. The Justicar inclines his helm and says nothing, because this is not his hall to speak in. Voss lights a fresh low stick and lets rain kill it, because a joke is cheaper than a sin. Holt raises her rosette one last time today, and the seal answers in her bones. Mandate issued, she says, and the words go out along lines not meant for noise. Leviathan, sanctioned servant of Hive Primus, bound to inquisitorial writ and auxiliar charter, escorted by blanks, limited by clauses, empowered by plans, witnessed by the throne. The city exhales as if a weight shifted from one side of the table to the other. They move to work that looks like epilogue and is only a next day. Malachar vanishes between reigns, leaving catechisms on wet stone. Word-bearer Vox lines hum with embarrassment and vows. A Seton shard watches a planet shrug a romance and files a note under annoying suns. The Officio Assassinorum closes a page with a line that says, "Asset spared as tool sharpened," and sharpens something else with the mood. House Helmore sends a formal notice that the lights returned, and he is pleased to have aided by placing men where things could be hit. Voss wipes her hands and tells a clerk to file it under lamp oil. Loom Tertius supervises scaffold crews bolting hexagram plates into 4 more stations, where the beast can seat relics when he's hurt. He teaches riggers the difference between law and habit. They teach him the difference between bolt and should. Grey knights wash their blades with prayers and water because blood dulls everything. The Justicar makes a list of names that includes Malachar and Selland, and his own ones, and underlines one. It is a discipline. Sisters of Silence stand bareheaded in the rain on the causeways so the lullaby can work where it must. On panicked herds of grot critters that fled a flooded pen. On demons that roar when they hit a null and try to climb around. On men with too much sermon in their ears, who could be talked down with tea and a hand on the shoulder if the room is quiet enough. A new thing appears on the spire's mid-crown, where the Noctilith once tuned itself for theft. It is a lantern built from the jam-jar boat's glass, multiplied 1,000 times in righteous excess and framed in sober steel. When the beast holds pressure on the storm and the city holds its lines, the lantern lights, not with warp, not with romance, not with sermons, but with the pale, honest glow of generators run by people who slept and woke and went on shift. It is ugly. It is correct. Word-bearer cells test new hexes on side alleys and lose teeth to enforcers who have learned to move under a god's windbreak. The mimetic plague tries a last spill and hits her sister's gaze and goes home cold. Malachar vows a lesson about art that will hurt worse and leaves a bottle with a note under a bridge. You taught me to work. I hate you. Thank you. The black ship drops a line of ink on a ledger and moves on. Terror receives a report that reads like a shopping list with knives. Somewhere in the palace, a ghost of a smile does not happen and is nonetheless felt. A custodian of small things, the shrine keeper whose rosarius is scuffed, sweeps the winter garden and finds a spent casing under a table leg. She puts it in her pocket and mutters, "Street names later." Voss walks by and grunts assent without breaking his stride. The boy from the gantry stands on a new causeway made of old bones and looks at the beast shaping wind for the day's first ferry. He lifts his lunch tin like a salute and then, embarrassed, lowers it. The beast does not know salute, but he lifts a limb just enough to knock the rain sideways for a breath so the boy can see the lantern clear. The boy will work in a water yard. He will curse and be cursed. He will never drown by surprise. A month later, the basilica rubble is a low island. Children play atop it, throwing stones at each other and at the idea of priests. Someone paints a line on the concrete. "Do not build here." People listen because the paint smells like the sister captain's gauntlet and the Grey Knight's blade oil and Voss's tea. In a crawl space, a leaflet lies under a pipe. It reads, "The city owes itself." It is not scripture, it is not propaganda. It is advice. Above atmosphere, a shard that refused to be named watches a planet organize its filth into law and shrugs with a grace that is almost respect. Far away, a sermon writer sharpens a nib and ink that tastes like resentment. Closer, a clerk alters a ledger to show that sanction does not equal surrender. And no one catches the change because everyone is tired, and the change is right. The beast stands with plates lined in pale gold geometry and an aquila reduced to angles laid over hunger like a bridge. He is very ugly and very useful. He does not dream. He waits for plans. He eats nightmares and demons and the measured despair of men like Selland, poured under writ. He takes wind on his chest and turns it so a boat arrives. He is not loved. He is necessary. He can carry that better than love. Codex note: sanctioned leviathans operate under inquisitorial writ as auxilia extremis. Warp expressions anchored to mortal plans are tolerated within defined corridors, with pariah oversight and Custodes sanction, so long as the clause-bound tithe model is observed and the Astronomican's law is not mocked. On a night that smells like metal and forgiveness, the lanterns along the crown flicker once and then hold. Rain moves sideways because something heavy decided it should. A woman in a doorway pulls her child back and laughs because the joke is better than the fear. A grey knight on a parapet cleans his blade. A sister lifts her chin and lets the drops hit her eyes because she does not need to blink when wind is honest. In a hab 2 levels up from the sump, a man writes a street name on a slate, Leviathan's Elbow. He scratches it out and writes simply, Work Street. He smiles. He goes to bed. He sleeps. The city dreams of water moving where it should, and when the nightmare comes for the edges, it finds a clause and a winter and a plate where a hole used to be. The last image is not a god. It is a map. The causeways, the cisterns, the repaired sluices, the bolts set to torque, the lanterns wired to sane girders. At the map's edge in pale geometry, a symbol glows. 2 heads made of angles nested on an abyssal plate, and the glow is small against the hive and enormous against the night.